This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10. Everyone's a critic. All right. Yeah, today's handover just before the news wasn't quite as tight as yesterday's. I concede, but, you know, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's always... You never know what's going to pop up next, except, of course, when it comes to right-wing media and desperate attempts to tarnish Labour politicians. I found myself a little bit surprised by what I didn't know. We're going to be talking about Keir Starmer's publicly declared hospitality, and that I think is the crucial point. Everything you know about the gifts and hospitality that Keir Starmer has received since becoming Labour leader in 2019, you know because it has been publicly declared. And the total runs to £100,000. Here's three things you might not know. Two things you might not know, one thing you might not remember. And this is going to inform the conversation that we're going to have for the first hour of the programme today. So two things you might not know. Keir Starmer has season tickets at Arsenal. The advice not to use them comes from his security detail. He could sit in his regular season tickets, but the cost in security, which would come from the taxpayer's purse, not indeed from the purse of a donor or the purse of Arsenal Football Club, would be too high, in his view. The ignorance that middle-class journalists, actually middle-class isn't relevant in this context, the ignorance that journalists and political figures display about actual football is extraordinary in this field. And it's driven by, well, largely political bias, but also by genuine stupidity. No football fan in the world really prefers to sit in the prawn sandwich section of a football stadium. The last thing you really want to be doing is watching through glass, for example, and not finishing your lunch before the second half starts, or whatever the hospitality arrangements may be, not finishing your afternoon tea. So if you want to turn this into a story, the worst thing you can do, the last thing you must do, is disclose that he actually pays for his season tickets. And it is a decision taken entirely on security grounds. If you want to send me a photograph of Rishi Sunak apparently sitting in the ground at Southampton, you need to have a look at who he's sitting behind, I think the owner of the club, and also you need to provide me with the details of the security that he received on that very rare occasion that he attended a football game, whereas Keir Starmer likes to get to as many as he can. So there is a fact for you. Here's another fact, and I didn't know this until Lucy Powell said it on Question Time last night. And I don't usually stay up for Question Time, but the clips are nicely collated, aren't they, in time for your morning commute. I didn't know this. The serving minister is not required to declare hospitality received in the commission of their duties. So if, for example, you are Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport and you attend cultural events, you don't have to declare it, right? If you're Prime Minister and you are invited to an event as a consequence of the office that you hold, you don't have to declare it. Chris Bryant, the Labour minister, has revealed overnight has reminded us overnight that Labour actually tried to change this law. Labour sought, and I don't know, perhaps will still seek, we'll soon find out, Labour sought to make it a requirement for actual ministers to declare hospitality received in commission of doing their job. Remember, facts matter. And the people to whom facts are negotiable or contemptible are the people that brought you Brexit, Boris Johnson, austerity, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, you name it. All of that. Facts matter. So he pays for his season tickets. He can't use them because of security. And he has to declare any hospitality received up until becoming Prime Minister because he wasn't in government. So this £100,000 figure goes back to 2019 when he became leader of the Labour Party. Can you remember how much Boris Johnson received solely to decorate his flat? It was £112,500 in the original reports. And he tried to cover that up. So the right-wing media is currently queuing up to attack Keir Starmer for publicly declaring correctly gifts and hospitality received that, had he been Prime Minister, he would not have been required to declare. The reason why Lucy Powell is second on this list is because she, as a shadow culture minister, is required to declare everything that she has received in commission of her cultural duties. But the actual Secretary of State is not required to. So £112,500 was the sum that Boris Johnson sought to secure from a peer called Lord Brownlow. It was only later that the series of WhatsApp messages emerged, much against Johnson's wishes. He claimed he'd lost them. He claimed that he couldn't remember who had paid for the decoration of his own home. He didn't publicly declare it. Dominic Cummings accused him of trying to break the rules in order to keep it secret. And then when the figures finally emerged, when the details finally emerged, it turned out that Lord Brownlow, who was planning to set up a trust fund to fund the refurbishment, ended up initially paying the costs himself. And the WhatsApp messages that he, well, I think arguably tried to keep secret by claiming that he had lost his phone, reveal that £112,500 was provided. Speculated at the time to have included wallpaper at £840 a pop. Now, when the details emerged, Lord Geit, the independent advisor on ethics and standards, was furious because he had himself cleared the Prime Minister of having breached ministerial rules without having seen the messages between Johnson and Lord Brownlow. So there is an absolute failure to declare, receipt of gifts, largesse, far in excess in one single transaction of every single thing Keir Starmer has done since 2019. Now, there are two things you might think at this point, if you're honest. You might think, don't use Boris Johnson as the measure by which to judge other prime ministers or other politicians. And I'd be inclined to agree with that. If you're not honest, of course, you might think that this is an exercise in whataboutery or that this is an exercise in obfuscation. It's not. I'm giving you the facts. If you hate the facts, it's because your scarf is tied so tightly around your neck that it's cut off the flow of blood to your head. This is a conversation in many ways about the media. This is a conversation about the contempt in which many right-wing members of the media hold you, because they continue to hold a torch for Boris Johnson, whose offences were absolutely of a different species. Well, Keir Starmer hasn't committed any offences. There's the first point to make. Boris Johnson was drummed out of the House of Commons, or rather ran away from the House of Commons after being found by a jury of his peers to have lied to the House of Commons. But the people who are still silent about that, or indeed the people that pay him £500,000 a year to write a column for the Daily Mail, are pretending that Keir Starmer has done something heinous, has done something wrong. So those are the two things that you may not know about the season tickets and about the rules governing gifts or hospitality to shadow ministers as opposed to serving ministers. And there's the thing you've probably forgotten. Boris Johnson rode roughshod over all the rules and regulations, tried to keep secret a donation from Lord Brownlow, prompted the resignation of not one but two ethics advisors in disgust at his absence of ethics, and tried to keep the whole thing secret by claiming that he'd lost the phone on which the transactions with the bloke whose identity he couldn't remember, the messages between him and the bloke whose name he couldn't remember, had been lost. And what is the right-wing media trying to do today? Coming up with some nice slogans, free gear Keir or two-tier Keir. It's hilarious, right? Now, here's the fourth element that we need to establish before the conversation can get underway. And that is, I think Keir Starmer is being bloody stupid. Actually, I think he is. I could be wrong. I'm conscious of overcompensating. I was tempted this morning not even to talk about this because it is so obviously a balloon of nonsense. But I decided to talk about it because I was fairly confident you wouldn't be as across the facts as I have become in the course of the last couple of hours. Those two facts about the season tickets, three, the season tickets, the security, and the what was the other thing? The season tickets, the security and the ministerial rules. You send me funny messages on the text and you can't then get cross with me for being distracted by the stuff that you're sending in that's making me laugh. And then there's the thing that you've forgotten. You've also possibly forgotten the chairman of the BBC having to step down after it emerged that he had facilitated a loan facility for Boris Johnson without telling anybody, because Boris Johnson couldn't live on a prime ministerial salary. So, listen, two wrongs don't make a right, but there aren't two wrongs here. There's epic wrongdoing, which was defended slavishly by the people now going after Keir Starmer, and then there is, in my view, quite big misjudgments undertaken by the current Prime Minister. And that's why we're going to not break the habit of a lifetime, but we're going to knock upon a door we rarely knock on, and we are going to ask whether this matters to you. So now you know the facts, and I reserve the right, obviously, to remind you of the facts should you seek to claim that there is some particularly egregious offence underway here. Everything has been publicly declared. Members of government didn't have to publicly declare it. Compared to Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer isn't even a minor offender. He's a completely innocent contributor to public service, accused of being a little bit greedy. And I think that probably works. I think being a little bit greedy probably works, which brings us to Harriet Harman, who I think is a stateswoman of sufficient stature to command our attention when she intervenes, particularly in areas that you might not expect her to. And she has criticised Keir Starmer for, in her words, doubling down on the receipt of hospitality, doubling down on the receipt of gifts, and insisting that he will continue to accept the type of generosity, the type of largesse that he has already received, notably from Wahid Ali, from Lord Ali. And that's where I think, and I could be wrong, and I'm haunted by a message at the beginning of the week about overcompensating. We live in such a bent universe, media-wise. How many left-wing, not even left-wing, how many Labour-leaning voices can you name off the top of your head with a massive platform in the UK media? Go on, I'll wait. That's very kind of you, thank you, yes. But who else? There must be some, you know, because, I mean, think about the right-leaning voices with massive platforms in the UK media that you can name. Well, I mean, on this radio station alone, you've got people that wanted to run for Parliament as Conservative candidates. You've got someone who wanted to run for Mayor of London as a Conservative candidate. I mean, so go on. Then you've got all the columnists in the Daily Mail, all the columnists in the Sun, every presenter on these weird new TV stations with no viewers. So go Labour, and that is really hard. Could you all get your tiny violins out now, please? I'll wait. Okay, thank you. Now, could you start playing something, maybe like the theme from the Hovis adverts? Something quite sonorous and dolorous, something quite sad and slow, okay? Can we all play that now? It's very hard for me, you know? Wah, 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 wah. That's the Last of the Summer Wine, isn't it? Not the Hovis. That's quite good. You can play that, actually. Play the theme from Last of the Summer Wine on your tiny violin, please. Well, I tell you how hard it is being me. So I come on air this morning, I see all the front pages desperately trying to pretend that Keir Starmer's done something heinous. I know that you will, many of us will be tempted to swallow it. But what I have to do is decide whether it's worth talking about at all. Do I come on air with my carefully polished pins and burst the balloons of balderdash that have been inflated by almost everybody else in the media? Or do I ignore the balloons of balderdash on the perfectly reasonable grounds that they're full of balderdash? And I don't know the answer to that question. Should I be talking about it at all? Am I only talking about it because the balloons of balderdash have been so successfully inflated? But isn't that a reason to actually come on air and pop them with my carefully polished pin? 3 or 4 pins today, and it's not even 20 past 10 yet. So, does this matter to you? And in some ways, the more you lean towards this government, the more relieved you are that things like, and I'll do this entirely off the top of my head, all right? Things like the unlawful prorogation of Parliament, things like misleading the Queen, things like expelling 21 MPs from the parliamentary party for refusing to tell lies about Brexit, things like Barnard Castle, things like trying to rip up the rule book on parliamentary standards because Owen Paterson had broken those standards. I've got some funny news for you on that front coming up later. Things like having a Prime Minister found to be in contempt of Parliament and running away in disgrace before his own constituents could hold him to account. Things like fibbing or desperately trying to cover up the receipt of £112,500 worth of home decor, a figure that exceeds the sum total of what Keir Starmer is supposedly on the hook for now. Getting your own dinner delivered to your own home during COVID, having more offences committed at the address of 10 and 11 Downing Street than at any other address in the entire country, despite the fact that you were making the laws that the rest of us were required to absorb, throwing huge parties, drunken bacchanals, while the rest of us couldn't even attend the funerals of family members if we weren't part of the very, very tight inner circle. That's 10 things. That's 10 things without looking down. But Keir Starmer received some free clothes and some football hospitality and some glasses. Oh, and they didn't realise they had to declare his wife's dresses. So they did. Do you see? You see how bent this country is? Do you see how bent my profession is? It's absolutely extraordinary. And what I mean by the Last of the Summer Wine theme tune and the tiny violins is that even someone whose entire career has unexpectedly become a corrective to the lies and embellishments and exaggerations that are in almost every other corner of the UK media. Yesterday, for example, having to come into this studio and see Nigel Farage sitting there, knowing exactly the role that he has played, picked up on yesterday by Mark Rowley, the head of the Met, in the emboldening of the kind of racist thugs who sought to set fire to hotels, sought to burn people to death in their own beds. And even I sometimes think, am I going mad? I mean, is it as bad as all this? But my goodness me, it is. So, 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me why this does matter to you. Keir Starmer has done nothing that breaches any rules whatsoever, but he's still muffed up, hasn't he? There's still something about this that you don't like, and I don't like either. What is it, and why? It's 20 minutes after 10.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10 is the time. It doesn't seem to me to be an unreasonable requirement that people should pay for their own clothes if they are in public life. And you can hold two thoughts in your brain at the same time. You can think that Keir Starmer should have paid for his own clobber. I think the wife issue is slightly different. I don't want to mansplain, but I think the pressure upon women's wardrobes in the public eye is very different from the pressure on men's. So you can hold that thought in your head while also recognising that attempts to portray Keir Starmer as profoundly in the wrong on this from people who were supremely comfortable with every dot and comma of Boris Johnson's epic moral corruption is simultaneously hilarious and disgusting. So how much does it really matter? 23 minutes after 10 is the time. Esther is in Bromsgrove. Esther, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think I've got the answer to your question. And
hang on a minute. I've got to keep this up till 11. I don't want you to close down the whole conversation now, Esther.
It'll start you off. I think that in normal times, we wouldn't know about all these things. And that when we were going through the terrible 14 years of corruption and all that nonsense that was Boris Johnson and his crew that followed him, was so bad, so disgusting, so obnoxious that it reached our eyes and ears. Now we've got that breath of relief with the grown-ups have come in the building. We want him, especially as an ex-public prosecutor, to be whiter than white. And he's not. He's just human. And the problem also is for a lot of people who were in public service themselves. I was a civil servant before I retired. You were so frisked by the rules that you wouldn't have even accepted a box of chocolates and a bunch of flowers from someone for fear of you had to record it and not have it in case you were showing favour to somebody or other in your work process.
Police officers, I mean, many other professions where that would be exactly true. But the same rules
looking at him, you know.
The same rules apply here.
They do.
The same rules apply to politicians. And if there were any suggestion of a conflict of interest, or if there were any suggestion that he'd broken the rules, then he would be hauled over the coals, and we would be doubly betrayed. But the point that we're exploring this morning is the fact that you and I both feel that there is something a little bit off here, and yet there isn't. He's done absolutely nothing wrong.
Yeah. I mean, they are the right-wing press, as you say, picking at every scab, scar or scratch to find some fault or other so they can say, there you go then, they're all as bad as each other. Well, actually, I'm a councillor in Bromsgrove, James.
Yes.
And we're not all the same as each other. I'm pretty much unique.
Is it? Are you? Gosh.
Yeah, I am. There's not another Esther like me.
I'm very glad to hear it.
I would not, as a councillor in Bromsgrove District, accept any gift from anyone for something that I'm doing to help the residents, for fear of somebody coming along and saying to me, you've favoured that person over somebody else, you know, whatever that's going on. So I know that down here in Worcestershire, that you know very well.
I do.
Why would he not know that? Especially as he's worked in the civil service and must have abided by those rules as a public prosecutor.
But he has abided. He has abided by those rules. I think we're describing the smell test. But if you, as a councillor, or as mayor, perhaps of Bromsgrove, or as the council,
don't have mayors in Bromsgrove.
All right, and the council leader of the leader of Bromsgrove Council. If Bromsgrove Town were to go on a cup run, then you would presumably turn up at the final as a representative of your office.
I might do, but I wouldn't be given the box to sit in.
Of course you would. Well, I mean, to be fair, the security concerns, for the leader of Bromsgrove Town are probably, for the leader of Bromsgrove Council, are probably not the same as they are for the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition. But you're suggesting, and I think this actually is probably the most valid suggestion until we speak to people who actually live in this world, that we just shouldn't have any gifts or free hospitality or I mean, they shouldn't accept anything.
I mean, they might say, as you've just pointed out, that he's already got his fee in year on year out for a season ticket with his football club that he likes, I don't care about. And he's paying his way there anyway, and he doesn't see why he should give up what he's doing. And they just decided to reseat him in a more safe place because he's
that's an enormous non-story. But the clothes and some of the other hospitality arguably does fail the smell test, even if it doesn't involve the breaking of any rules.
Just think about this, James. What about his wife? Why doesn't she behave with the integrity of Princess Anne? Why doesn't she say, well, I don't need a fresh dress or a fresh frock every time I'm doing something? Why don't I recycle some and make myself look more human?
Well, how do you know she doesn't?
Would that not go down really well with us?
How do you know she doesn't?
Well, she may well do, but why are they picking on her?
I'm fairly confident. I'm fairly confident that Princess Anne has received considerably more in free gifts over the course of her career in public life than Victoria Starmer would do if she remained the Prime Minister's consort for the next 50 years. So I don't think that really works either, although I'm not criticising Princess Anne, but you can bet your bottom dollar that the royal family have received a hell of a lot more freebies than the Starmers.
Yeah, so what you're saying is the news are picking and choosing the way they want to spin their story.
Exactly.
And you shouldn't believe a word they say.
Bingo. There it is. And yet, here we are. Should we even be talking about it? Do we serve the public? Do we do our proper job as journalists by pointing out the facts? Or do we ignore the people who treat their audience with complete contempt by filling them up with balderdash and furious feelings? I don't know. What do you think, Councillor?
Well, I'm just as confused as you, but then I listen to you on a daily basis.
Very wise.
And by the end of the programme, somebody has usually rounded us up and given a round of applause.
You're absolutely right. Fingers crossed. We get a caller who can nail it all down. Esther, take care. Give my love to DY10 next time you're passing through. So Chaddesley Corbett it sits between Bromsgrove and Kidderminster. I always think of Chaddesley Corbett as the bridge between Bromsgrove and Kidderminster. And one day I am determined to write a short story about a detective called Chaddesley Corbett. I see such a beautiful name. It's a beautiful village. Got a beautiful old... Do you know Chaddesley Corbett, Esther?
I do. I know very well because I was born in Bromsgrove. I've lived here all my life. And so if you're passing through, knock on the door.
I shall do that, Councillor. You can rest assured. It is 10:30. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're having a conversation about Keir Starmer's failure to break any rules and wondering why elements of the media and, of course, the Tory party, what remains of the Tory party, are trying to portray him as someone who remains silent, of course, about Boris Johnson's routine and serial breaking of pretty much every rule under the sun. And we're just wondering whether it works. In fact, I think after Esther's contribution, the conversation moves slightly into the realms of who is this aimed at? Who is this aimed at? It's aimed at people who are too busy to find out the facts for themselves. The triumph of right-wing media over the last few years hinges upon denying their audience the facts, whether it's the idiocy of leaving the European Union or the madness of putting Liz Truss anywhere near the reins of power. You can't tell the people the facts, right? The lie is halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. So people who are reachable for the lies must be the constituency that's in play here. Not the people whose scarves are tied so tightly around their neck they can never contemplate supporting or voting for anything other than the party they've always voted for, even if it's the party that brought you austerity, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and the rest of it, the breaking of Britain, essentially. So who is this aimed at? Is it aimed at you, do you think? Have you felt yourself wobble a bit? Have you felt yourself? Because I'll tell you now what the greatest friend of the fascist or the greatest friend of the truly corrupt politician, the greatest friend of the riot inciters, for example, the greatest friend of them is the line they're all as bad as each other, because they're really not, which is how today we find ourselves bombarded with coverage of Keir Starmer's declared hospitality. And we are supposed to be much angrier than we were about Boris Johnson's undeclared largesse, one example of which, his flat decoration, exceeded the sum total of everything Keir Starmer has received since becoming leader of the Labour Party. That line there, right? I mean, listen, keep sending me texts accusing me of whataboutery and all the rest of it, but that line there is the bit where you feel really stupid and get even angrier, but sadly not with yourself for being a mug, or indeed the people lying to you, but with me. This is another cross that I bear, another little round of the Last of the Summer Wine theme tune, please. So the total that Keir Starmer has received since becoming leader of the Labour Party is less than the largesse that Boris Johnson tried to keep secret when he was having his flat decorated. And I don't think that was what Lord Geidt resigned over, the second ethics advisor to resign in disgust at Boris Johnson's behaviour. I think he resigned over the Partygate situation. Although he was misled, he was very cross about not being told about what had gone on during the flat decoration. So just compare those two stories, one of which is utterly scandalous and one of which is not. One of which is not even a minor breach of any rule, and ask yourself how we've ended up in a country where this has been presented to you as A, major story, and B, a major scandal. Who's it aimed at? Who is this aimed at? Philip's in East Bolden. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Love the show. I can't disagree with anything you've said there about the media. I'm a Labour Party member. I've tried to be a councillor twice in the area that I live, which tends to be a little bit more conservative, to say the least.
Where is East Bolden? Are you in the northeast? Or
It's in between Sunderland and South Shields and Newcastle.
Okay.
The glorious triangle.
Fantastic. Smack in the middle of it. Go on.
Yeah. I'm trying to convince people that the story, as you state, is not a story and disgraceful. but I have problems. A neighbour of mine said, I'm never going to vote for the Labour Party again.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And he couldn't really explain it.
There's the answer to the question of who is this aimed at? And there's your answer.
Yeah, well, it was him. Yeah. I have listened to the programme, yeah. But I'm almost the same age as Keir Starmer. I've got 5 daughters, 10 grandchildren. When I take my children on holiday, I pay for the holiday. When I take my children to the football match, I pay for the football match. And I'm struggling with the moral high ground. And I know that the Labour Party's always had to try twice as hard as the other parties to get the moral high ground because of the press, exactly. I just think it would be much better if Keir Starmer went back to when he was the DPP and didn't accept freebies and made a statement like that. His sort of big independent rival here is Jamie Driscoll, who was kicked out of the party. Without going into any of that, one of his big claims and his moral high ground is that he never accepts freebies. And I'm still a member of the Labour Party.
If you're leader of the Labour Party, you get invited to the FA Cup final, you get invited to the Euros final, you get invited to the Challenge Cup final. I mean, these are invitations. And if you don't turn up, you get accused of being unpatriotic by precisely the people that are giving you the kicking for turning up. So I'm not buying it, actually. I'm not buying it. I get where you're coming from, and I'm worried about your neighbour. But imagine if the leader of the opposition wasn't sitting in the background at a big England game, or wasn't sitting in the background at the Challenge Cup final. You know, so what is the offence here? Accepting invitations. The clothes are different. The clothes are different. I don't think there is an offence.
Yeah. No, but I don't think there is an offence. But I think the moral high ground would be say. Yes, I'll accept that, but I'll make a donation to charity. And I'll go back to what I said at the start. You know, there's a non-story. He's not breaking any rules, but to gain the moral high ground, then you could make some charity. Well, I think he could make moves in that direction.
I don't think you can gain the moral high. He'd be accused of virtue signalling if he did that. I could be wrong, but your neighbour. Yeah. The clothes are tricky. Yeah. I think the clothes are trickier than the hospitality. Yeah. But the hospitality, and your neighbour would never have voted for Boris Johnson, I presume. But and it is the media who inflated him all the way to Downing Street. The media that turned a blind eye to everything from his serial adultery through to his moral and political depravity. That the same members of the media are going after Keir Starmer on this, and your neighbour proves that it works. So let's imagine...
Exactly.
And this is what Harriet Harman is saying. Harriet Harman is saying, don't double down on it. But what Starmer is calculating, and I think he might be getting this wrong, what Starmer is calculating is the importance of not changing your behaviour because of the people and the forces that we're describing coming after you with their confected fury. That's the crux of this whole conversation, isn't it? Should he buckle to the lies and propaganda of the right-wing media because the lies and propaganda of the right-wing media are working on people like your neighbour?
Probably not. But I think there could be some VM media. You know, I haven't read a lot about this story, but I think about a year ago he went on holiday in Wales. The holiday for his family was paid for. I think you could say that you don't need to accept that one. I do accept your point about high-profile events like the FA Cup. But
remember, this covers a 3-year period. This goes back to when he became leader of the Labour Party. Again, a lot of the coverage seems designed to suggest that he's accepted all this hospitality since becoming Prime Minister. And, of course, as Prime Minister, he's not required to declare anything. So the problem goes away unless they change the law. And but you've nailed it. You've nailed what I failed to articulate. You could call it the smell test. I don't know. But is that even fair? You know, there is no fire here. There is no fire. But there is smoke. And it's the smoke that's got up the nostrils of Philip's neighbour. It's the smoke that's got up my nostrils. There's a smoke that makes me think, oh, you silly old sausage. Why have you even allowed yourself to be accused of these things? To which his response, and this is coming from Simon, Starmer absolutely has to ignore this kind of media and all the performatively angry dummies. And I don't know. And that's a really interesting question. And that's a question we're probably going to be returning to again and again during this government. Should Starmer ever acknowledge the propaganda and lies of his enemies, his many, many, many enemies in the media? So how helpful is it for me to sit here reminding you of Boris Johnson's moral depravity or Dominic Cummings's regime in Downing Street and all the awfulness that entailed, how helpful is it? I need to remind you that the people pretending to be outraged about Keir Starmer were categorically not outraged about the much worse conduct of their heroes. But how? I don't know, you see. I mean, I'm thinking, like Harriet Harman, just announce you're not going to take any more. But then what do they do next? What do they make up next? What do they inflate next? What do they embellish next? What next massive balloon of balderdash prompts him to change course from what he would otherwise do? I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. Sarah is in Westminster. Sarah, what would you like to say?
I think it's all absolute nonsense, and I think if...
Yeah, but it's nonsense that works. I'll shut up now. I'm interrupting you before you've even drawn breath. But it's nonsense that works, and that's where I'm nudging the conversation next.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen on Twitter people saying that Rishi Sunak sat amongst fans at Southampton, and that is just a load of rubbish. He's surrounded by men in suits. How many Southampton fans do you know that go to football in a suit? It's rubbish.
Not just Southampton, to be clear. You're not casting aspersions upon the Southampton following. Very, very few people go to the football in a suit.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, you're right, it does work. And I think if the media can just focus on this, and this is what their problem is, then he's doing something right. I think he should absolutely double down. I think people saying that his wife should be more like Princess Anne. What a load of rubbish. She's not Princess Anne. And,
Don't be mean to Esther, all right? Esther was just thinking out loud like we all are. And she probably resigned from that position shortly after making it.
I mean, if you look what happened to like Angela Rayner when she turned up in her green jumpsuit, I think she looked fabulous, but the media went mad. They will do that. Just let him crack on. I think he should double down and just get on with it, because people are going to want to give the Prime Minister freebies. I think, of course, there's a line.
But they're not freebies. I mean, well, they are freebies, but they're invitations. I mean, you get invited to things as Prime Minister or as leader of the opposition in this case. And
exactly. And I think if he said no thank you, or he made a statement saying I'm not going to accept it, you'd have the same exact thing. Oh, he thinks he's better. Oh, he's making refusals. He's not patriotic. I think he can't win. Like Jeremy Corbyn couldn't win.
Yes, Jeremy Corbyn, arguably, by completely ignoring the right-wing media, created exactly the circumstances in which he could suffer such ignominious defeats, pretending that it wasn't going on. Whereas Starmer is addressing the accusations that are being made and refusing to buckle to them. Harriet Harman, always worth paying attention to, has suggested that his excuses were making things worse, which is at odds with Sarah and still slightly at odds with me. The Prime Minister had made a mistake, she said yesterday, by doubling down and insisting that he would continue to take donations from figures such as Lord Ali. I think that there's three elements of this conversation now. There's the Arsenal football, which is stupid to suggest that he's done anything wrong there. There's the clothes and spectacles, which I don't get. I don't know why you would need to do that, except to say that he looks really smart and statesmanlike, and I don't know that he could do that on his salary. And then there's all the hospitality, which is a question of getting out there, accepting invitations from people who are inviting. My dad always used to say to me when I first got going in newspapers, when I became show business editor and I started getting invited to all sorts of things, my dad always said to me, "They're not inviting you, son." He'd get my business card once and he said, "Look at that." He said, "They're not inviting James O'Brien, they're inviting show business editor. You stop being show business editor tomorrow, you won't get any of these invitations." Which was not quite true, actually, but it was largely true. Depends what kind of friendships you've struck up with the people who were issuing the invitations in the first place. But Dad always said that, and I always thought, I didn't really take it on board at the time, but it's the office that is being invited. Leader of the opposition has been invited to the football. And I mean, it's really odd, this. We're arguing that there is smoke, but there's no fire, which is a mad thing to argue. It's a complete contradiction of the old proverb, isn't it? And we're also increasingly informed, and the more informed we become, the easier it is to arrive at Sarah's conclusion that he has done absolutely nothing wrong. And yet here we are, talking about it. Should we be? It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:49 is the time. There's an extraordinary press conference underway with victims of the former Harrods owner, Mohammed Fayed, the subject of an extraordinary BBC investigation into allegations of sexual assault and rape. I'm sure more details of that will be brought to your attention in the course of today, but more claims coming forward as a consequence of the BBC investigation that was published yesterday, and some of the details contained within the testimony of his victims are horrific, absolutely horrible. I mean, the crimes themselves, but also the culture of cover-up and the allegations that members of his security team would be involved in intimidating women who had been assaulted and in some cases even raped by him. So that I don't know quite where that story goes next, but it certainly isn't going away, despite the fact, of course, that Mohammed Fayed died in September of last year. 10 to 11 is the time. They're much more serious than anything to do with football games or free suits. But I noticed that the Conservatives are trying to blame this on Keir Starmer as well, because one 15-year-old girl who accused Mohammed Fayed of assault took her case to the police, and the CPS decided that there was no realistic chance of conviction, and so didn't pursue the case. The case wouldn't have reached Keir Starmer, and yet you can bet your bottom dollar the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph and the increasingly bankrupt Tory front bench will be pretending that this is somehow an issue for him to answer as well. I didn't expect it to happen this quickly. I don't know why. You know how naive I am, how idealistic and often wrong I am about other people's malign impulses. I thought they'd wait until we were near to a general election before they started wheeling out these massive balloons of balderdash, but nothing's sacred. And here we are. So what's going on? Anne's in Manchester. Anne, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Can I turn this on its head?
Yeah, please do.
And say, accepting gifts is the only way that someone with my background can now aspire to be Prime Minister and have a family life.
How do you mean?
Oh, I'm a season ticket holder.
At Manchester United?
Well, yes.
And you live in Manchester?
Yes, I live in Manchester.
Well, I've never met one of you before. That's incredible. A Manchester United season ticket holder who's not from Surrey. I'm joking. I don't want to invite the ire of Manchester. I'm only teasing you. Go on.
Sitting in the crowd, I can just imagine what kind of stick I would get if I was Prime Minister and sat in a crowd.
Well, you no
in
one.
The seats where I sit.
No one who routinely attends football thinks it's feasible for him to sit in his normal season ticket seats. No, literally no. Even as a Kidderminster Harriers fan, Anne, if I was Prime Minister, I'd have to go and sit with the chairman behind the manager's box. Wouldn't I? Not that that's bad. I have had the pleasure of sitting with the chair. He's a lovely bloke. I don't want to sound like I'm ungrateful for his hospitality, but we prefer to be in the thick of it, don't we?
We do, and also I like to go to concerts with family, and I just couldn't aspire to become a Prime Minister when all I'd get is this steak. And talking about dresses as well, with my background, I couldn't afford a dress to meet the head of state or go at a banquet at Buckingham Palace. So the only way that I could be Prime Minister is to accept gifts in this system.
The wardrobe requirements of the role are beyond our ken, really. Because the Starmers aren't poor, and you're not poor either if you can afford season tickets at Manchester United. But everything is relative, isn't it? And the wardrobe requirements.
So I do get a discount.
But it's still not cheap.
Oh, no, it's not cheap, but it's worth it.
Yes, no, I'm like this season.
Oh, it's not. It's going to get better.
Yeah, okay, it's worth it. Football banter. No one tunes in for this, but when it happens, I love it. So I mean, you're sympathetic to the simple detail of the case. Really, is that he can't sit anywhere else, and she certainly needs a little bit of help with her wardrobe because the requirements of the wardrobe have suddenly gone bonkers compared to what her requirements would have been previously. They're not poor, but they're certainly not sort of Rishi Sunak rich.
I wouldn't know where to start, if I'm going to visit the Queen at Balmoral. What do I wear? My wellies.
No, you should take your wellies.
The right kind of wellies.
I could find out for you. I could make some calls, actually, and if you ever do get the invitation... it wouldn't be the Queen anymore, would it? It'd be the King. But if you ever do get the invitation, I shall find out for you. So who's it aimed at then, Anne, briefly? Who are these balloons of balderdash supposed to be persuading?
It's putting people off. if the only way that you can, become Prime Minister is to accept gifts under this system, then you wouldn't do it, would you?
If you're going to get a kicking for doing it, then what are you going to do instead? I don't know. And accepting gifts or receiving invitations. You go to a party, no one accuses you of accepting a freebie. You get invited to the football. It's not really accepting a freebie for me is something that Pop Bitch accused. Are you familiar with Pop Bitch, Anne?
No.
It's a scurrilous website that told fibs about me earlier this year. It claimed that I was ringing around PR companies trying to get free tickets for the Six Nations rugby, which was so completely removed from reality and so completely made up that you sort of find yourself wondering whether there's another James O'Brien out there doing things that you're getting the blame for. But that would be, if you're ringing people up saying, can I have some free stuff, please? That's very poor conduct. Not mentioning any names, but that is very poor conduct, particularly for a public figure, because then the conflict of interest kicks in. Then you find yourself wondering, what is the quo that you get pro the quid? Or what is the quid that you get pro the quo? But yeah, I mean, this is a story about the leader of the opposition getting invited to loads of places because he's the leader of the opposition. And the more we talk about it, the harder it is to remember what it is that we're supposed to be getting cross about. Oh, he's got to be whiter than white. He is. You can't say Keir Starmer not breaking the rules proves that he's just as bad as all the people who did break the rules. Which reminds me of Owen Paterson and the most delicious postscript to Owen Paterson's public disgrace, which was fast followed, of course, by Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and a bunch of other people, including senior members of the right-wing media, desperately trying to rip up the rule book full of rules that he had broken because the rules had been broken by their friend. But they're all the same as each other. Keir Starmer has broken no rules. But don't let me go home without giving you the Owen Paterson story. Anne, is it a home game tomorrow, Anne?
No, let me see. No, we're not at home tomorrow.
Right.
It's next week.
Right, I wish you luck for the away game then. Lawrence is in Wiston, it says here. Another place I've never heard. Well, I'm having a geography lesson on the show today. Lawrence, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for the programme this morning.
You're very welcome.
I think people of our generation are all turning into Victor Meldrews, to be quite honest.
But the invitation to be a miserable git is quite hard to resist sometimes.
Yeah, it's an open door for us. But I think, first of all, I'm not a Labour supporter. I used to be Conservative supporter, no longer anymore. I mean, they pressed the typical Conservative self-destruct button about 6 years ago, yes, and they've never recovered for it, and they've gone into oblivion, and who cares who the leader is? He won't be the leader by the next time they come to have a general election. But the more important thing is that there's no story here. There's no story at all. He hasn't broken any laws. And there's no issue.
Or rules. Right, he hasn't broken any parliamentary rules, crucially.
No, nothing. There's nothing to go at. And yet this has been blown out of proportion. The sad thing for me is this is hitting front pages, it's hitting TV, it's hitting radio, and of course we all get excited about it. There's bigger things that we should be talking about at the moment that really are so critical to the future of our economy, to the future of our security, to the future of world security. We're on the potential grip of two world wars in the Middle East and with Ukraine and Russia. And this is really what we're talking about. The right-wing press should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. Why aren't they digging...
And the left-wing. Well, what's left, if there is such a thing as the left-wing press?
Wherever it is, it doesn't really matter where it sits. But, if it's 200 grand in the bigger picture, and I know some people say, it's 200 grand, et cetera, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to what the corruption of some people in the previous government gained out of the PPE.
It's a different universe. It's a different universe of wrongdoing. I mean, it's not even. We're not even We're comparing wrongdoing to non-wrongdoing. It's incredible, isn't it? The more you think about it,
it's stupid. Now, I do think, trying to take the balanced point of view, that actually a lot of things that happen with governments and politicians, it's optical. It's what people see, and I would suggest it was probably the wrong time for Keir Starmer to do these type of things. I'm sure he's got enough suits to land him through to the next election. And I know
he did it all before. He did it all before the election.
Yeah,
all of it. Every single penny is before the election.
but he's still probably got those suits and they'll last
No,
him
of
for the
course.
next election.
Of course.
Yeah. When you come into these roles and responsibilities, that there are clearly some things that you gain by taking these positions, but there's some things that you lose. And he might have just had to give up his season tickets and not go to the football at the moment until we actually start to see recovery of the economy. We actually start
I
to see we're
think
looking after people.
these are valid. I mean, no one would deny him any downtime whatsoever. I wouldn't necessarily agree that he shouldn't be going to the football if it is the sort of the key pleasure that he had. But remember that the trouble that he got into when he said he tries to have dinner with his family on Friday nights, Lawrence. I mean, I'll say that again because you possibly think I exaggerate the bentness of the kind of people that are inflating these balloons of balderdash. Do you remember how much trouble he got into when he said that he would try to have dinner with his family on Friday nights? Yeah, of course you do. I think it happened even on this radio station. But here is a criticism, and this is from one of the journalists I most admire, actually, the public policy editor of the Financial Times, which is neither right-wing nor left-wing, but dedicated to the facts, which means that Brexiters hate it. Starmer and Labour have created a vacuum by failing to create a plausible, positive growth and rebuilding narrative in their first few months. So the narrative of everything being broken without now, after 100 days, having a proper prescription for repair and improvement, that, to me, is something that Keir Starmer can be criticised for and should be criticised for. That this is from Pete Foster at the FT, and he points out that when you have a vacuum created by the failure to create plausible positive growth, a failure to promote a plausible rebuilding narrative, then the vacuum will be filled with noise. And the noise that is filling the vacuum, because journalists have papers to fill and shows to fill, the noise that is filling the vacuum is the nonsense about how much Sue Gray gets paid, about Keir Starmer's fondness for football, attending football matches as a guest of the clubs or as a guest of the FA. So he does bear some responsibility. And that criticism, for people too stupid to understand what proper criticism and proper journalism is, I'll try and help you, although I'm probably wasting my breath. The criticism there, a substantive criticism of policy decisions, is a million times more troubling. It's a much, much bigger problem for Keir Starmer than criticism about his suits. So the bent right-wing media is not only dishonest and stupid, they're also missing the opportunity, because it won't sell as many papers, to provide proper substantive criticism of paths that the Labour Party under Keir Starmer has already set off down. Chiefly, that failure identified by Peter Foster of the Financial Times to create a plausible, positive growth and rebuilding narrative in their first few months. The history books will be a lot more concerned about that than they are about free spectacles.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
So you know how much I like kind of underlying themes, don't you? The one that's emerged most recently is the idea of, and I know it sounds familiar, but it's not. It's all about identifying precisely the point of inquiry, the successful efforts to persuade people to vote against their own interest or to act against their own interest. I'd sit it alongside people who like being lied to. And that really is the challenge that we're going to have to face together in the coming years, is to distinguish between the people who like being lied to, never more so, of course, than on the issue of immigration, and the people who really do benefit from being told the facts, which Tim Farron did rather powerfully on Question Time last night. The people who like being lied to. Some research in the news today about the brains of people who describe themselves as leaning to the right being more attuned to fear and anger. So I think that probably leads, although the differences are relatively small, they're probably reading too much into it. But people who enjoy being angry, people who like being lied to because it makes them angry, versus the people who will change their minds when they are presented with facts. That probably misattributed quote of John Maynard Keynes. When the facts change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do? Couldn't be further away from public discourse in this country at the moment. It just occurs to me, looking back over the last hour, how much of the time that we spend together these days ends up sort of circling the same focus, circling the same problems? Why do people like being lied to? How can people be so easily persuaded to vote against their own interests? These are ancient impulses that some people throughout history have been very, very good at poking. But we move on now to something completely different, to a story that I have. The reason I was talking there about bubbling under the surface is that there are some stories or questions that I have that are eternal. And they're permanent. I don't know how long I'm going to do this job for. I find myself surprisingly attracted to the idea of an early retirement, actually, which... and then I have days where I think, I can't imagine ever giving up this job. I'll be like Tommy Cooper. I shall pass away in the saddle, so to speak. But I don't know how long I will be doing this job. So I don't know if I will be on air when we begin to find out the answer to this question, which is what happens when all the people renting retire? Or what happens when all the people renting want to retire? What happens when this new generation of non-home owner, remember that under the Tories, for the first time in living memory, we became less likely to own our own home than our parents. What happens when all of those people approach retirement age, where once as homeowners you would have been able to, you would have paid off your mortgage by then, most likely, ideally, and therefore it wouldn't be a problem. Or as a resident of social housing, or what used to be called council housing, the rent would be affordable, and it would be met in conjunction with your state pension. But now, if you are renting in the private sector, what happens when you reach retirement age? Because you ain't going to be able to pay your rent on your state pension, and the damage done to the welfare state in the context of what used to be called housing benefit and the rest of it is, cataclysmic. I presume you'd have to sign yourself up for some form of universal credit. So the point is, I don't know, but I do know this. Winter is coming. There is some sort of apocalypse on the horizon when this happens. And the first sign of it in the news, because I've been asking you that for ages. We've never done it as a phone-in, and we're not going to do it today. It's precisely that, as a phone-in. The news will begin to address this issue as the clock ticks, as the world turns, as the years pass. And as I say, we may still be spending our mornings together when this particular chicken comes home to roost. But here's an indication of why I think this is such an urgent issue. There's a report published this week that shows that most workers, not some, but most, are not making sufficient contributions to their own pensions, and that's the ones lucky enough to be in a position to do so, to ensure a comfortable retirement. Indeed, they describe undersaving as a ticking time bomb. It looks at the adequacy of future retirement savings and finds that less than half of private sector employees contribute what they need to contribute in order to have a relatively comfortable retirement. You need to be contributing about or more than 8% of your earnings in order to secure your retirement. The report shows that up to 40% of private sector employers who have contribution incomes are on course to have individual incomes in retirement that fall short of the standard benchmarks used to define comfort or security. This comes from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, a profoundly respected and respectable organisation. The Nation said one pension provider is facing up to a ticking time bomb with increasing numbers of people heading towards retirement with inadequate savings. He describes it as more than a societal issue. This is Jamie Jenkins, Director of Policy at Royal London, but an economic challenge. People should be able to retire with dignity rather than feel they enter life viewed as a burden on the working population. They enter later life viewed as a burden on the working population. Again, if we were having conversations about proper politics, we'd be looking at, well, we are now, but we didn't in the last hour. You'd be looking at this story through the lens of the winter fuel payments. So the 60% of pensioners who are well, actually, this is in the future, but the dedication of various governments of a conservative flavour, and I think under Tony Blair as well, to look after pensioners because they're more likely to vote Tory, but forgetting all the people who are going to be pensioners soon. So if you transfer funds, fiscal support from the working population to the retired population with things like the triple lock or the winter fuel payments, you actually add to the likelihood of the current working generation being in all sorts of trouble when they become the retired generation. And I want to know what that's like. I hesitate to ask this question because it's not going to be something that you're particularly happy about. But, I come from a position of sympathy, and I would certainly see it more as a consequence of politics and the financial sector's irresponsibility than I would of any silliness or wrongdoing on your part. But here's the question. Have you been ambushed by your own retirement? You just presumed that you were going to be quite well set up. Have you realised, perhaps as a consequence of your housing arrangements, have you realised that you're genuinely never going to be able to retire? That's the question, possibly, but it may be built upon a misapprehension on my part or a misunderstanding on my part. What is it like to realise that you can't retire? How big a constituency of people is that? Martin Tooting, who is statistically reliable, tells me that there's currently £15 billion being claimed in housing benefit by pensioners. So there's the answer. What happens when everybody who's renting now wants to retire, if they can afford to? The cost to the public person, how much of that £15 billion is making its way into the pockets of private landlords? Making its way from the taxpayer to the private landlord, to the private investor, to the usually, not always, don't at me, the usually already wealthy, independently wealthy private landlord. It's what the Tories have set up, all these siphons that take money from you and me to people who've already got more than they could ever need. The landlord enrichment goes hand in hand with the removal of property ownership from the reach of so many people. It's incredible when you think about it. But pension undersaving is a ticking time bomb. What is it like when you actually start to hear the ticks? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I'm talking about your lived experience, as it were, of realising too late that you are in this category. Lawrence O'Brien, no relation, he's a research economist at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. He says too many private sector employees appear on course to end up on a low or disappointing retirement income. A quarter of employees still not saving into a pension at all. Auto-enrolment is perhaps one of the answers to this problem. But the reality of it for you now is what? What is it like to arrive at what you thought would be retirement and realise that you can't afford it? And we can't get an answer how widespread is it, but we can get an inkling, can't we, by how many people respond to this question by saying, crikey, James, that's me. And it's too late for you. Arguably, for someone listening to this in their 30s or their 40s, you could be the wake-up call that they need. Hit the numbers now. You will get through, okay? 0345 6060 973. It's 11:17.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
I really respect you, Seema, and I'm like this. And happily, in particularly in recent years, my financial situation has exceeded my expectations, and that just makes me lucky. But otherwise, I would be very much ahead in the sand merchant. And Seema writes, as a renter who is now under-saving due to sky-high rent, I don't want to listen to the radio now. And Seema is one of my most assiduous correspondents and contributors. This is my head in the sand moment. Well, my job is to drag your head out of the sand and have a look at the horizon. When you combine under-saving for pensions, property markets, private rent versus difficulty of getting a mortgage. What is on the horizon? What is likely to happen to us when retirement age rolls around? 20 minutes after 11 is the time. It shouldn't... I'll read this one out. It shouldn't be described as a wake-up call, James, when it would be impossible for us to do anything about it anyway, even if we are made aware of the problems on the horizon. You're making us sound lazy. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it will be possible for some people to save more, to increase the percentage of their income that goes into their pension, but you're absolutely right. It won't be possible for everybody who recognises that they should be doing that. And Liam says, I will eventually inherit half a decent house in a good area, so I'll probably rent for the next 25 years and then buy a small property outright when I'm in my mid-50s. If my parents were currently renting or lived in a poorer area, I would never get off the rental. I would never get on the ownership ladder. And what does that mean 10 years later when you're ready to retire? Mark's in Durham. Mark, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Mark.
I'm a 50-year-old man who has working 2 jobs now, and I get auto-enrolled into the company pension every year, and I opt out of it every year for the simple fact that I can't afford for that money to come off my payslip every month. It's as simple as that. And I understand what people say and what you just said about putting your head in the sand and thinking, well, I don't think about it. That's the top and bottom of it. I just do not think about my retirement because I can't envisage myself retiring.
I know, but you're thinking about it now, or rather, you're thinking about the absence of it because this describes you, and you'd be, if you're taking yourself out of the auto enrolment. But
if I don't take myself out of it, James,
you can't keep your head above water.
Like, my budget's so tight every month that it doesn't work, and having that money coming off my payslip every month is just. It just puts us into more debt.
But you're keeping it. I know you know that, and yet you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're robbing future. You're robbing future Mark to pay present Mark. Can I ask how you've ended up in this situation? I mean, do you have outgoings that are not normal? Have you had a divorce in your life or something like that?
No, me and my wife have been together for 30 years. We've worked all the time. I think it's just poor financial decisions early on in our relationship.
Right.
We've got our first house. We've always been homeowners. We've always had a mortgage.
Right.
From 1995, so nearly 30 years now. The mortgage is close to being paid off. I had to remortgage the house again.
Right.
But it was just poor financial decisions, and I think that was kind of generic from financial decisions that my mum and dad had made.
But you'll have paid the mortgage off by the time you're in your mid-60s, will you?
Yeah.
Well, you'll be in a better position than a lot of people listening then, won't you? You're just struggling in the day-to-day, and you don't know what your income will be when you get to retirement age, but you could conceivably remortgage the house and live off that for 10 years.
Well, we could do, but it doesn't bode well. If I live in the 80s, what am I going to live off?
This is what we're talking about. Well, if you live until your 80s, what are you going to live off?
What am I going to live on?
I don't know. You don't know. And as you say, we're sticking our heads in the sand as a society, not just as individuals.
I've taken on another job, James, just so I can make ends meet. Just so we've got a quality of life.
And so how many hours are you working then in the average week?
So I work 7 at night till 3 in the morning at a factory in Durham, and then I get home around about 3:30 in the morning. Then I'm back up at 8 o'clock to start walking dogs all day, and then I'm back to finish walking dogs about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I'm back to work on a night time, 5 days a week.
It's not very good for your health, is it?
Definitely not. I mean, I would like to say I'm quite fit. I'm a fit 50-year-old, but it catches up to you by the weekend. That little bit extra income that we've got to kind of have recreational fun and do what we want to do as a couple and help my son and my daughter out is wasted because I'm just sleeping all the time.
I bet you are. You're flat on your back. And the thing is, there's supposed to be light at the end of the tunnel. That's the role that retirement is supposed to play. Is I'll put this shift in, I'll do this, I'll get my shoulder to that wheel, and then when we get over the line, we'll be in clover. That's gone. And we are in a national denial about it. And as this fellow from the Royal London says, this is not just a societal ticking time bomb, it's an economic one, because those who are still in work, I think, are going to be required, whatever happens to that housing benefit bill. This isn't specific to Mark, who I think as a homeowner is probably in a slightly better situation than he realises compared to a lot of people listening to this. Whatever happens to that housing benefit bill, however much it goes up by, that is going to have to be met by the generation that is then in work, that is working at the time. Chris is in Fareham. Chris, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
I'm a financial advisor, mate, and when I sit down with people and sort of explain to them what size pots they're going to need,
yes,
and what level of income they're going to need in retirement, I see the blood drain out of their faces, particularly younger people.
Yeah.
It is people in their 40s that really have the biggest shock, because they tend not to have significant pension pots at that stage, and it is that wake up, oh, yeah, I am marching towards the age at which my parents wanted to retire at. Or
what are they thinking before they sit down with you? Are they not thinking anything, or are they misunderstanding or under a misapprehension? Are they just thinking, well, everything will be? How do you? Because I think, if my fortunes hadn't improved unexpectedly in my sort of 40s, I think I might have been. Luckily, my wife is a lot more responsible than I am. But I don't know. Is there a sort of a dissonance? Is there just a presumption that you'll be okay because we don't see lots of old age pensioners sleeping in this? I don't know. Where does the security, the false security, come from, do you think, Chris, of the people you're dealing with?
That's a really interesting question. I think there is just a blissful ignorance until, right, we need to take it seriously. We're in our 40s and we can take it seriously now and we'll be fine.
Right. So we've postponed it and now we're going to go and deal with it. And then you tell them that it's already too late to provide the kind of... So when should you be starting? When would you tell people to start thinking about it?
I'm going to sound like a right tool now, but my
can't really say that. Don't dump it, because I haven't heard that word since about 1984. So no, you're not.
My kids have had pensions since they had national insurance numbers. So
16.
I started them. No. The second they've got a national insurance number, I think I started with when my son was 1.
I didn't think you got a national insurance number until your 16th birthday.
Well, maybe I'm wrong with national insurance number, but basically they can have a pension from the moment they're born.
So you've opened up that avenue for them from day one. I opened it up
and I started chucking it in. But and this is what I tell clients and their children, and I try to be a little bit sort of, I know you're sat in front of me now, Mr. and Mrs. Client, and you're in your 60s or your 70s, but do make sure your kids know that they can pay into their kids' pensions. And basically, Jane, you've got to start as young as you can.
You can't be too young. You can't be too young.
Massive difference.
Of course it is. But then you hear Mark, who cannot afford it. People like that are going to. I mean, it's going to depend upon the efficiency of the welfare state. You're going to have people who've worked all their lives expecting to be looked after when they reach retirement age, which seems to me to be a reasonable expectation, especially when you factor income tax into the equation. But they're going to be the ones most exposed.
It is, and when you talk to these people, and then I go into the detail, and they've got these massive mortgages.
Yeah.
In particular, the last couple of years, they've come out of 1% interest rates on their mortgage, and they're paying 5-something. And you say, well, if we work it back, this is the pot size you need to have when you reach 65, 67, whatever age you want to retire at. And you work it back and say, well, this is how much you need to pay in every month. And the blood drains out of their faces. That's when
the gulping starts. That's when, as you say.
And then you say, well, you can't actually really, as things stand, you can't actually retire at 60. You're probably asking to wait for the state pension. And then, I'm faced with this thing at the moment where the government are sort of moving the state pension age up and up as well. So, was 65, 67, moving to 68 for people of my age. And
that is, I mean, we need to be a bit sanguine about that because life expectancy is getting longer. We're staying healthier and fitter and capable of work for longer. So that's not And it's a bit unfair if you started work expecting to end at a certain point, but if the finish line moves a little bit further away, that there are some rational and reasonable justifications for that. But equally, the finish line disappearing over the horizon, as I think it's going to do for many of the people that we're talking about today. In a sense, the people whose blood is draining from their faces when they sit over the desk or on the sofa next to you, they're the lucky ones because they're getting a warning in their 40s, whereas some people aren't going to really get it until they're in their 60s. I think this is huge. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where a sort of scale of the problem on the horizon when it comes to pensions moves into focus. This is something we're going to be talking about more and more in years to come, because I think, and the psychology of it was interesting, wasn't it, with Chris? The people in their 40s who've always intended to get around to it and who expect a decent retirement because they're relatively high earners, and they sit down with a financial advisor in their 40s and set out their expectations, and then get told what they would have to contribute from their current income in order to have the retirement that they're hoping for. And to use his rather powerful phrase, the blood drains from their face. Don't know how this happened, that we've ended up in this sort of situation. But I know that when attempts are made to protect public sector pensions, the usual suspects are up in arms because private sector pensions have been so badly bruised and hit over the years. And I've told you this before, it's one of my favourite analogies. I've always found that kind of rhetoric, and it comes from almost all corners of the media and right-wing politics. I've always found that sort of rhetoric to be the same as saying, I got mugged yesterday, and therefore you should get mugged today. So because government legislation has allowed the private sector to rewrite the rules of pensions, then it is absolutely outrageous that people in the public sector still get relatively good pensions. I've never got that. You should have resisted changes to the private sector pensions. Two wrongs are never going to make a right. But and also, have you ever been mugged? I hope you haven't. Did you really wake up the next day thinking you wouldn't be happy until your neighbour got mugged too? Or was your problem with the mugger as opposed to the unmugged? That's what I hear. I could be wrong, possibly being a bit naive, but when I hear people who have been victims of changes to the private sector pension world, like the kind of people we're talking about today, getting very cross about the pensions that police officers enjoy or firefighters or whatever it may be, I always find myself thinking that you're getting cross with the wrong person here. You should be getting cross with the mugger, not with the unmugged. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit naive. Leslie's in Bishop Stortford. Leslie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Hi, James.
Hello,
Morning.
Leslie.
Hello. I phoned to say that I've been, for a number of years, I was doing work with a homeless charity, and the number of elderly women, particularly, that were homeless, really, I found it quite shocking to be. People hear about younger people who are homeless, but, there were women in their 60s and 70s who were sort of sofa surfing. And now I don't know whether that was because of pensions, but obviously they'd had difficulties in housing at their age. And it just seemed really awful.
So where were they sleeping? I mean, sofa surfing is quite a broad church, isn't it?
Sleeping with friends. None of them appeared, because I used to do sort of driving around as well on the dropping people off at churches and things, which sort of let out their undercrofts and things for people to sleep.
Yes.
They didn't seem to be many people doing that, but seemed to be living in very difficult circumstances.
Why? What would be the abiding themes, the recurring themes to describe their situation? A lot of it
did seem to be sort of mental health type issues.
Okay, so that's austerity related then? Yes,
where they just were unable to cope with life and had made decisions that perhaps weren't very wise. And the onward impact of it was that in their 60s and 70s, they were homeless.
And what can you do to help them?
Homeless.
What can you do to help them?
Well, try and help people not to have to live years and years in those sort of circumstances.
How did they lose their previous home? Do we know?
Not really. A lot of it seemed to be about shockingly, just simple inability to regulate their money.
Right.
So they wouldn't be paying the bills on time, which would then build up.
And that's where the mental health issues would become pertinent, isn't it?
Yes, really quite straightforward problems for most of us to deal with, but obviously won't on these occasions.
And it's only going to get worse, not better, unless, and this is where the criticism of the current government should be directed, the current absence of a plausible plan for repairing and rebuilding much of the damage that they have inherited. I suppose if you were cheerleading for the people that did the damage, then you would be desperate to be talking about football tickets and free suits as well. But all of us, especially the responsible members of this profession, and by profession I include the callers to the programme, should be focusing upon improving the situations that we're hearing about now. Situations that are almost certain to get immeasurably worse in the immediate future. So the first thing you'd look at is probably care homes and the punitive costs involved there. And that's for the people who reach a point of vulnerability that Leslie describes in some cases as seeing them slip through the net. Arthur is in Northwich. Arthur, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Long time, this is the first time caller.
Welcome.
I'm 73. For the last 50 years, I think the entire country has had its fingers in its ears and gone la, 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 la about this issue. We've known that people like me, baby boomers, were going to be around. We've known there were record numbers of pensioners and there were going to be a smaller number of people earning the money. How on earth did we ever think that this was going to work? You know, it's just crazy. And you just think, why has every single government pretty well ignored it? I retired 8 years ago, and ever since I've had at least one part-time job to keep my head above water.
Is retirement becoming a thing of the past in the traditional sense?
I think it is.
I do too now.
I worked for a charity, a local charity, for 30-odd years, mainly with people who were unemployed or had low educational achievements and so on and so forth, you know. Yeah. And I think, if I had to struggle a bit to get a job and work after I retired, what on earth are they doing?
Yeah.
And if I only had my state pension, I'd be eligible for pension credits. I think that's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. And I've worked at a sort of professional level for quite a long time, and you think, this is insane. And somebody needs to get hold of this situation, you know, by the throat, really, and sort it.
Did you have your fingers in your ears?
No, I always thought, what the hell do you think is going to happen at one point? You know, but I always had this vague idea that when I retired, you know, I would be not rich by any means, but I would get by. But I didn't think I would have to do. Until recently, I've done 2 part-time jobs.
So there's a false sense of security born of generational experience, probably of thinking of old age pensioners when we were young, and thinking they're all right, therefore I'll be all right.
Yeah, because not everybody is working. People who are working on low pay can't afford private pensions. You know, I mean, private pensions not big.
0-hour contracts, self-employment, all of the other areas of employment that have grown up over the last decades are going to reduce the likelihood of you being set up. And as you say, yours didn't reach the parts that you expected it to reach when you were paying into it as a younger man.
Well, that's what you're always told to believe, wasn't it? Oh, you get your state pension, you'll be all right.
Yeah.
And yet we knew, really, you know, we've known for a long time that if you relied on only a state pension, you would not live well. You know, we've known.
When did that become
long.
The truth, do you think? Has that always been the truth? Don't forget, I'm just a mere slip of a lad, Arthur.
Well, I think probably we knew about it in the 70s, to be truthful.
Okay.
I think we know about a long time. You've always heard this expression, I'm only a pensioner. Well, that doesn't suggest that you're living the life of luxury, does it?
And yet we've had successive Tory governments taking, prioritising pensioners' economic welfare over everybody else's. And I don't think that's an opinion. I think that's just counting.
Yeah, and I think also...
we may never know. He's reached the phone line gave out towards the end there. Rosa is in Aberystwyth. Rosa, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say I think you're approaching this entirely wrong. You've already identified the issues that have led to this, and about half of your contributors, mostly by text, have been telling you clearly They cannot save because rent is too high.
No, just briefly, I read out that
get evicted if you don't pay.
I read out the texts that challenge the
not getting these
majority narrative. Let's be nice, Rosa. Otherwise, no one's going to be able to hear what you say. What are you cross about?
I'm just telling you that this is the experience of countless people, is that they can't save because rent is too high. You said yourself.
Yes, but we've made that point repeatedly. I don't understand your grievance.
My grievance is that we can change these things. We can change what the private pension schemes are. The government can actually decide that companies aren't allowed to do whatever the hell they like and land their workers in a bad situation. We can decide to regulate, even abolish landlordism.
Yes, that was the point I made. That's the point I made 5 minutes ago.
I don't think so. It sounds to me, and I think...
Talking about changes to legislation governing private pensions are only really complained about when people are trying to attack public sector pensions in precisely the same way.
Well, you mentioned it, but you didn't say, I would like to say, why don't we advocate that the government does something about that?
Yeah, we also said this is precisely the sort of thing that Keir Starmer should be addressing, and the plausible plan for growth and rebuilding is a much more valid area of criticism than his attendance at football matches or receipt of free suits. I mean, I'm a little bit confused why you're having a go at me.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I think a lot of people who maybe don't usually listen to your show, I don't know.
Bloody hell, chill out, Rosa. Why is Rosa having a go at you? What on earth is this woman talking about? I've never heard a more balanced discussion of the looming pension crisis. Here we go. Maybe don't allow these kind of people to come on air. It's a really bad listen. So that's what happens when I read out all the texts as they come into the studio.
Yeah, that's fine. James,
so what is the point you're trying to make?
Some people can't save because rent is too high.
The first caller works 2 jobs and makes no pension contributions because he can't afford to do so. The very first caller to the whole programme.
I know, and yet you're saying over and over people have a false sense of security. It's not a false sense of security.
No, those are other people. So, for example, the people that sit down with Chris, another caller, and who have been capable for 20 years of making contributions to their pension pot, but haven't done so through a false sense of security. So it's almost as if, Rosa, lots of different people have lots of different experiences, and you feel that the programme should have been dedicated exclusively and entirely to yours.
No, it's not even my experience, but I felt personally that it was...
Well, then you'll allow me to continue the programme that does reflect people's actual lived experiences, as we promised to do at 4 minutes after 11 this morning. It's 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:49. Fraser Knight is here to bring us up to date with developments at this Mohammed Fayed press conference. But Keith just said in my ear during the break, he said, you know Fraser's title, don't you? Or do we need to put it on the screen? I had no idea you had a title. What are you, a Viscount, an Earl?
I'll take that.
What do you mean? You mean LBC reporter, Fraser? Yeah, I probably was all right with that one. Okay, I could probably have rolled with that. We'll hear from Fraser shortly. First, Dean is in pool to steer us back to the pensions conversation. Dean, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello.
Very, very big fan of the show. I've never really felt an impulse to phone you before,
yes.
But it made me go a bit cold when you was talking earlier on about the situation, because it's exactly my situation. I think I've had blinkers on for years and just sort of walked on through life. All of a sudden, I'm 57 years old, 10 years until retirement, and I was renting up until a year and a half ago with no idea at all what I was going to do. I mean, my thoughts were I'd probably move into something like sheltered housing, something set up by the local authority.
Which is less likely than ever, I think, in terms of simple availability. So you just presume that when you reach the finish line, everything will be okay. I think there's millions of people like you.
The biggest thing for me is that I work for the local authority.
Good Lord.
And I didn't do the sums. When you actually realise within our borough,
yes,
there are probably only about a dozen sheltered accommodation places. So that would probably be less than 100 people, maybe.
Well, this is the worst kind of radio, in a way, because the temptation would be to turn it off, right? And to think, oh, flipping it, I can't be doing with this now. Like, I've got enough on my plate. But we must have got something right today, because you have, as you say, you've kind of had a bit of a slap around the old chops, haven't you? And I guess the thing I don't want to say out loud is it's probably too late for you to do anything meaningful about it.
No, luckily, and I'm not going to exactly open the bottle of wine at the moment, but my mum released some equity for me from her property
to get you on the property ladder.
So a year and a half ago, I moved into my own flat, and I've got a mortgage which will take me until I'm 68. So I've got 11 years.
Okay. Oh wow! And then you'll be quite well set up. But again, thanks to Mum. In a way, and you've worked all your life for the avoidance of doubt, Dean, and just presume that's the social contract. That's it. Actually, we could have got to this a little sooner, perhaps, if I was a bit more on the ball. It's that phrase, social contract. You presume if you're fulfilling your end of the social contract, then the state, or whatever the correct word is, will fulfil their end, and their end would be a comfortable-ish retirement, and yet that has been broken.
At least have a roof over your head.
At least have a roof over your head.
I don't even feel... I look at my brother, I think of my daughter.
Yeah.
No one in my family, the younger generation, have got their own properties.
Or the prospect of having one anytime soon. And this is precisely what the criticism of Keir Starmer for having a plausible rebuilding plan is going to be moving towards. I think 100 days in, it would be unreasonable for him to be tackling these enormous systemic, infrastructural, societal issues. But, I mean, he can't ignore them indefinitely. And Dean is not alone. I'm 47, writes Marion, self-employed most of my life. I've got no pension provision, although I have been in a position to make contributions for most of my working life. I suppose I just thought I'd get around to it and things would pan out okay. That's me, head in the sand. Because if I think about it, it brings on a feeling of existential dread or the fear that it's too late. And then she adds, and I somewhat, I hope tongue-in-cheek, maybe I won't make it to pension age. 11:53 is the time. This extraordinary BBC investigation into Mohammed Fayed, who I think on Fleet Street at least was widely known to be something of a wrong-un, but whose the depths of his depravity, Fraser Knight, have only really been confirmed in the last 24 hours. And in the last 2 hours, things have got even worse.
Yeah, there's been a press conference by a group of lawyers who now say they're representing 37 women who've come forward with claims against Mohammed Al Fayed. And what they've said is they're now going after Harrods, who they've accused of corporate sexual exploitation. They have described Mohammed Al Fayed, the former owner of Harrods, as a monster who was enabled and potentially allowed to commit widespread sexual abuse by the system that was in place. These lawyers have actually compared some of those, accounts to those that we heard of around Jimmy Savile, around Jeffrey Epstein, and around Harvey Weinstein, saying it's the worst of those cases pulled together. Now, Natasha, who is one of the alleged victims, spoke at this press conference about her experience of working with Mohammed Al Fayed, and just a warning, some of what she says might be distressing here.
I was subjected to an unnecessary and intrusive medical examination. I was never given those results. We would be sent to see Al Fayed because he had a job for us to do. But then these private meetings turned into more. A forced kiss. His hands gripping your face to his lips, or pulling you down on his lap, where his hands were free to explore.
And the lawyers were saying that lots of women faced similar experiences there, where they were going for jobs like personal assistants or even just an interior designer, and were subjected to really intrusive sexual health checks. Now, among the lawyers on this team is Gloria Allred. You might recognise her name. She has represented victims in some of the most high-profile sexual abuse cases, including those of Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein. And she gave her analysis of what happened at Harrods.
Harrods is often referred to as the most beautiful store in the world. Many women dreamed of working there. To be associated with this prestigious corporation, however, underneath Harrods' glitz and glamour was a toxic, unsafe, and abusive environment.
Now, of course, James, Mohammed Al-Fayed died last year, aged 94, and some of those lawyers saying they wish he was alive to see the reputation that he's left there. And Harrods have said that today the organisation is a very different one to the one that was owned and controlled by Al-Fayed between 1985 and 2010. And they say since new information came to light last year about historic allegations of sexual abuse, it has been our priority to settle claims in the quickest way possible, avoiding lengthy legal proceedings.
And one element as well that is particularly harrowing is the efforts put into silencing women by people who were not Mohammed Fayed.
Yeah, we heard about security who were paid to follow these women and make sure that they weren't speaking about what happened. Some of them tapping phones, it's alleged. Others, just keeping an eye on them, even to see if they were in a relationship to feed back to Mohammed Al-Fayed. They said there were cameras everywhere other than in the chairman's office.
Fraser, thank you. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Henry Riley is with us for a little bit of an update on yesterday's adventures. Do we have a little reminder of what was said in this studio just over 24 hours ago?
I will come to that, James. Don't worry, I'll give you the full recap. You may not have been aware, James, but Nigel Farage was in this studio yesterday.
What?
I think maybe
surely someone had something to say about that.
Maybe a slight crossover with yourself. But there were, of course, a range of issues that were raised by Mr. Farage and by callers. Firstly, this was a question from David in Manchester.
Nigel, you've taken some criticism recently, so the question I'd just like to ask... the question I'd just like to ask is, do you now have an office in Clacton, and how many surgeries have you held there since elected?
Oh, very good. You must have been briefed with the Daily Mirror, David. Well done, you. Mark, where do you live, David?
Manchester.
Oh, I'm pleased that Clacton's so keen for you. Do I have an office in Clacton? Yes. Am I allowing the public to flow through the door with their knives in their pockets? No.
Why would the people of Clacton want to flow through the door with knives
in
their
pockets? Well, they did in Southend. They murdered David Amos, and he's a far less controversial figure than me.
But then we got some specific details, James, as to why Mr. Farage is not holding surgeries. This is what he said.
I'm dealing with emails and phone calls with Clacton residents every single day. Although I have to be honest, I've been so overwhelmed with the thousands of emails that I've had that putting together an office, putting together a team and attempting to get through the backlog is one hell of a job. I am doing some Zoom surgeries.
Right. You won't be doing physical surgeries in Clacton?
Not yet.
Do you envisage that you will eventually?
When Parliament allows me.
Why is Parliament blocking you?
Have a guess.
Have you been advised for your own security not to hold surgeries?
I would have thought that would make sense, wouldn't you?
Who was that advice come from?
Well, the Speaker's office.
Lindsay Hoyle's office.
And beneath the Speaker's office, there is a security team who give advice and say you should do some things and not do others. So we're not in a fit state to do the old-style surgeries. But you know what, David? If you've got something to say to me as a Clacton resident, actually Zoom is not the end of the world, is it?
I thought he was passionately opposed to working from home.
Well, I mean, his argument is Zoom's a sort of a way for him to do it.
But obviously, what the first thing any decent journalist would do is get onto the Speaker's office.
Well, and that's exactly what we did. So we went to the Speaker's office and the House of Commons security team. They said they have no recollection, our understanding, of telling Nigel Farage that he should not hold in-person constituency surgeries. The Speaker's office would never advise an MP not to hold in-person surgeries. They would instead advise MPs on how to safely hold in-person surgeries.
And that would apply to every single MP in Parliament?
That would apply to every MP in Parliament.
Right.
But
so what's his late... Let me guess, there's another wriggle.
With Nigel Farage's spokesperson has spoken with us about that. So he gave us a statement yesterday whereby he has moved away from the point that it was perhaps the Speaker of the House of Commons and said that advice had come not to hold in-person surgeries. He's still maintaining that was the case, but from the Parliamentary Security Department and the Home Office. So I've spoken with both of them. With these kinds of cases, James, they will not comment on an individual MP. The Parliamentary Security Department comes from the House of Commons. They're saying that they won't comment on this, but they do offer all MPs a range of advice when it comes to surgery. So it's a sort of blanket advice for all MPs.
And of course, after the murder of David Amos and indeed Joe Cox, many MPs took much more stringent security measures at their constituency surgeries than they had previously done. So Well, what a turn up for the books, eh? Nigel Farage saying things live in this studio that turned out to be completely untrue.
Well, you're right, and you're right about MPs. I mean, there's a few that have officers in their constituencies. There's a few that have different ways of doing it. You have to register before, whereas you never had to do that in the past. So there are some MPs are holding in-person surgeries, but going about it with more measures.
So just to be clear, how many has he held so far, either in person or on Zoom?
In terms of a specific surgery, none. But he's dealt with constituents sort of one-on-one via, or his team have dealt with individuals one-on-one via Zoom or as he puts it, telephone calls as well.
Henry Riley, many thanks. Who'd have thought it, eh? What a turn up for the Bucks.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are poised to do a very Friday phone-in. So sometimes on Fridays, when 12 noon comes around, we find ourselves reaching for something a little lighter than previous territory. And we've had quite a heavy week, haven't we, actually? Today, probably, arguably, the least heavy show of the week. We've had some incredible contributors. I think first of Margaret, who rang to tell us about what it was like to discover child sex abuse images on her own husband's computer. That was in response to our condemnation of the failure to imprison people guilty of crimes like the ones that the former BBC presenter Hugh Edwards committed. And last Friday we did something very grown up. I can't remember what it was. I'm 52 years old, you know. I can't remember what it was, but I did get a few messages saying, oh, flipping heck, James, I thought we did the light-hearted stuff on Fridays. So we are going to do something light-hearted today. But I have a producer working with me this week who hasn't worked with me before. I don't want to give away any details because it would be embarrassing for everybody concerned. He said, the nice thing about working on your show is you get really intelligent callers, don't you? He or she said that. Oh, yeah. Obviously, I can't possibly reveal what shows they normally work on because that would be embarrassing for all concerned. You get really intelligent callers, which is why we're particularly looking forward to... the topic that is on the horizon. But before that, because as you know, I am almost certain to forget if I don't deal with it quickly. Here is Owen Paterson, who I think is something of an emblem of the rottenness at the heart of the Boris Johnson government. Here is Owen Paterson speaking in 2014. No? I'll try that again. Here is Owen Paterson speaking in 2014.
Much of the problematical immigration into this country stems not just from the EU, but from the European Convention of Human Rights. And this is exacerbated by the rulings of judges in the court at Strasbourg and by our own UK courts implementing the Human Rights Act. Repeal of the HRA and adoption of a new Bill of Rights, breaking free from the ECHR, would also relieve us of migrant pressure, including such absurdities as not being able to deport illegal immigrants who come to us via Calais, because, according to our judges, France is not a safe country for asylum seekers. Outside the EU, and freed from the writ of the ECHR, freedom of movement within the EA could be limited to free movement of workers without having to accept dependents and members of their extended families.
Complete misrepresentation of some of the facts, as you'd expect. But who do you think, which disgraced former MP with a record of calling for the United Kingdom to withdraw from the European Convention of Human Rights, was at the European Court of Human Rights this week, arguing that his right to privacy had been breached under the European Convention of Human Rights? Who do you think could possibly have engaged in an act of such weapons-grade hypocrisy, claiming that his, quotes, good reputation, end quotes, had been damaged by the public findings and the process followed to investigate his egregious breaches of lobbying rules, breaches that, of course, prompted Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, Charles Moore and others to set up the Save Owen Paterson Society in an upstairs room at the Garrick Club and seek to rip up the rule book rather than see their friend held to account for breaking the rules. Could it possibly be Owen Paterson, who this week sought to save his sorry ass by appealing to the European Convention of Human Rights just years after calling for the entire country to be withdrawn from it, and who was told that his application was inadmissible and manifestly ill-founded. So which former disgraced MP who called previously for the entire country to leave the European Convention of Human Rights found himself in front of the European Court of Human Rights this week, begging but failing for a kind of a dispensation designed to restore his completely tarnished reputation? Was it A, Owen Paterson? Was it B, Owen Paterson? Or was it C, Owen Paterson? I'll leave that one hanging and reveal the answer before the end of the programme. But remember, Keir Starmer's spectacles are a much bigger scandal than Owen Paterson's egregious breach of lobbying rules, his colleagues in both Parliament and the media's attempts to get him off the hook by ripping up the rule book, and then his hilariously humiliating appeal to a convention on human rights that he wants to deny you access to, but which he thought might get him off this particular hook. I'm not going to give away the answer to that one. I'll just run through the options again. Was it A, Owen Paterson? Was it B, Owen Paterson? Or was it C, Owen Paterson? Right, now we're going to take a bit of a risk. Come here a minute, all right? It could all go a bit Alan Partridge, this one. And this is why my anonymous mystery producer has staked quite a lot upon the quality of calls that we get in response to the question that I am about to ask you, all right? Because it has to be a really thoughtful contribution. And I'm actually going to try and be a proper grown-up radio presenter this hour. I don't know if you were listening to yesterday's handover with Nick, but I actually brought it in bang on time, to the nanosecond, possibly for the very first time ever. And it's given me a new lease of ambition. I'm thinking, be more professional. So I'm going to take notes. I'm going to keep a proper record of everything that you tell me. And by at 1:45 today, and after that, I want to speak to someone from Birmingham Live about an extraordinarily powerful and harrowing report that they've done into child poverty. So we've talked about one end of the generational scale and the financial problems facing them. Journalists in Birmingham have done an incredible story at the opposite end of the generational scale and the problems facing children living in poverty. We're going to find out more about that before 1 o'clock today. But by 1 o'clock today, I want to have arrived at an answer to this question that is actually consensual. It's not going to be unanimous. I will accept text contributions, but what I really want is you to ring in and talk me through your reasoning. So, British scientists have, and I tell you who I have to thank for this as a phone-in topic, Lucy Easthope, the author of When the Dust Settles, the sort of doyenne, 2 N's and an E, of emergency planners. British scientists have stored DNA information for an entire human on a crystal, which could be used to bring back humanity if we become extinct. I know what you're thinking. Who on earth is going to be in a position to bring back humanity if we become extinct? The answer is some as yet unidentified species from the future, or from probably from outer space. But don't get bogged down in the detail. This is a Friday phone-in, all right? So it is a little bit fantastical. This bit's true. It's the University of Southampton's, wait for it, Optoelectronics Research Centre. They've used lasers to describe the data on a 5D crystal. What's a 5D crystal? What's a 5D crystal? Do we know? That's probably one for Mystery Hour next week. And they say, and frankly, who are we to doubt them? Who are we to doubt them with their 5D crystals, that it can survive for billions of years. So now you move into the realms of possibility. You know, intergalactic space travel, the extinction of the human race, some as yet unidentified alien stumbles across this crystal and they can somehow translate the instructions, and they realise that if they were to do something with the details etched into this 5D crystal, they could create a human. You'd probably need 2. You'd need an Adam and an Eve, wouldn't you, really? Or you could just presumably create as many as you wanted. But we don't want to get bogged down in the detail, remember? The university has described the crystal, which is, of course, equivalent to fused quartz. We knew that already, didn't we? You knew that, right? Equivalent to fused quartz, as one of the most chemically and thermally durable materials on Earth. It can withstand massive forces. It can withstand extreme temperatures. It can withstand exposure to cosmic radiation. And that's cosmic as in interplanetary, not cosmic as in an adjective beloved of hippies. Whoa, it's cosmic, man. Cosmic radiation. And an entire set of DNA instructions found in a cell have, using ultra-fast lasers, been imprinted on this 5D crystal. I understand almost none of the science. And I suspect the same is true of you. But you do understand the question that I'm about to ask you. Ignoring all the science, which human should we choose? Think about it. You are that the entire species is extinct. Humanity is no more. But we have saved the DNA of one human. Do not get in touch to tell me that I've completely misunderstood the science by asking this question. I don't think I have, but it doesn't matter. It's Friday. It's just a bit of fun. The entire human species has been eradicated. It is extinct. But billions of years from now, an alien scientist realizes that they have the... Because it would be, it wouldn't be gender specific. An alien scientist realizes that they have the power to bring back humanity via one human being. Currently alive. Has to be someone currently alive, I think. Does it? Yes. Otherwise the science doesn't work. So one human being currently alive or recently dead enough for their DNA to be harvestable. So it could be someone... Oh, this is getting a bit weird now. It could be someone who's still someone alive, I think. A human being currently alive that we believe together best represents humanity itself. So that billions or millions of years from now, an alien life form decides to bring back humanity from extinction in the form of one human being. Who would it be? 0345 6060 973. And I want you to think about it, and I want you to make a powerful case for why your nomination should be the first human. The first human. We get to choose. It's like an Etch-a-Sketch. All right, it's not a lot like an Etch-a-Sketch, but it's a bit like shaking the Etch-a-Sketch of humanity, and the screen is clear, and we start all over again with one human. Who should it be? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
There's a clear leader already, although I have to tell you that this is one of those moments where we are victims of our own success. In the sense that I can't keep track of my inbox. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, it's impossible for me to even begin reading a text. There's lots of funny ones coming in, but they disappear before I've even got to the end of the first sentence. There's one clear leader, which is kind of obvious, and no doubt will pop up very early on the phones. But remember, it's got to be someone representative of the whole of humanity, the very, very best of us. Okay? Who's it going to be? If we can save the DNA of one human to restore humanity itself in the event of our extinction by an alien life form billions of years hence, who would it be and why? 20 minutes after 12 is the time. Jason's in Braintree. Who do you reckon, Jason?
Hello, James. Good
Hello.
to speak with you.
Likewise.
Sir David Attenborough, without a doubt.
Well, I'm glad you've said that, because he is the leader of all the text coming in. But now we move to the why. Why?
He's seen every part of this world that you'd want to see, underneath and above.
That's a really good point, actually.
He's got, and he's met every nationality and every type of person that you could meet, probably.
I don't think that bit's true. He's probably seen more of the planet than almost anybody else.
Yeah, and come across all different types of people at different levels, from people that are living in jungles to people that are living in palaces.
Yeah, but so what? Because none of them are there anymore, and the planet is still there. So the aliens will be able to, in their magic spacecrafts, they'll be in their alien spacecrafts, they'll be able to visit the entire globe in a weekend.
But he's got history. He can tell. He can actually tell everyone what he's seen, and
we've got his programs for that. It's only humans that are extinct. We've still got all the DVDs.
He's just a good, honest.
You've just said who your favourite person is. This is not a case for necessarily him being the only human to survive extinction.
Well, if he's a favourite runner at the moment, I think.
What about physical? What about physical attributes? What about strength and reflexes and things that we want to be perpetuated into the new dawn of humanity? I mean, you might be better off with someone who can run a 4-minute mile, for example.
That doesn't make him a decent person, though, does it?
But why is decency the thing? How do you know that David... I'm a big fan of David Attenborough. I'm not for a moment casting it, but neither of us know enough about him to conclude he's the most decent person ever. What about your mum?
Good point. She would be a great person.
There, you see, you hadn't even thought of her, had you? You ungrateful,
No.
You ungrateful monster. Brought you into this world.
I hope she's not listening.
Look, Attenborough is the current winner, but I am obviously not putting him over the line yet for a number of reasons. How much concern should we show towards physical prowess? I appreciate everybody gets old and their physical prowess diminishes, but it is DNA defined in some sense. And remember, it's only humanity that is extinct, not our achievements. The buildings are still there, albeit a bit run down. But certainly the planet is still there. So just because someone knows a lot about the planet, if Earth had been destroyed and you needed someone to sort of be the historian of the planet, then Attenborough would take a lot of beating, but not as the exemplar of humanity itself. Nick's in Ashby de la Zouch. Nick, what would you like? Who are you going to save?
James, Stephen Fry.
Oh, come off it. Really?
No,
so this is going to be quite an unfortunate little episode for me, because people are going to ring in with all our favourite people. I really like Stephen Fry. I really like David Attenborough. I've cast myself in the role of devil's advocate now. Why would you want to save Stephen Fry?
Well, because I'm intrigued by the fact that you now want to potentially find someone who is going to instill or distill even all of humanity into achievements. And I'm thinking aliens would love a recreation of Blackadder.
They would, just someone being funny and erudite. Well, but we've got all the books. So again, Attenborough, Fry is like the intellectual equivalent of Attenborough's natural history, is that we think he's read all the books. He knows all the poems. So you'd say, but we've got all the books and we've got all the poems.
But I think as well, Stephen Fry has got one thing.
He didn't write Blackadder. It should be Ben Elton.
Intelligence,
Richard Curtis.
Compassion. I think Stephen Fry is... Yeah,
he's a lovely bloke. He's a lovely bloke. Again, I don't know him well, but if we were to be picking intelligence or certainly compassion, he would probably suggest 100 people ahead of him in that particular queue. What about Luke Littler?
No, I'm afraid I can't go with Luke Littler.
What? I'm going for Luke Littler at the moment. The man's a prodigy.
It's your show. I suppose Luke Littler can win if you want, but I'm going for Stephen Fry and I'm sticking to it.
Whoever sent Luke Littler in as a text that disappeared down the screen before I could see your name, thank you for providing me with that opportunity to make Nick laugh. So David Attenborough and Stephen Fry, both kind of favourite people, but favourite people is not necessarily first human territory. What is first human territory? What criteria? What should we be looking at? And I insist that you take this seriously. Chris is in Whitney. Chris, who's it going to be? Who would be the first human?
What sprang to mind with me straight away was Gary Barlow.
Why?
Because he's just, he's young, he's fit, he's a handsome man, and he's just... and let me finish. And he's squeaky clean.
He's not squeaky clean. He got into trouble for his tax affairs a few years ago.
Oh, well, that's money, isn't it? But everything else is squeaky clean, isn't it?
Well,
really?
As far as we know it, Gary Barlow. So this is you've got I'm just imagining this laboratory. You've got the sort of the great and the good of the alien class who are all sitting there waiting, and one of them pours something into a test tube. Don't at me about the science. And they're saying, so what is humanity? Look at what they created. And they've still got sort of the great works of Shakespeare. We've got the works of Dostoevsky. We've got the music of Beethoven and Mozart. And we've got some remains, the architectural remains, or at least photographs of the Colosseum or the Taj Mahal or the Pyramid at Giza or Machu Picchu. And they're all sitting there waiting to discover a member of this species that left behind this incredible legacy. And Gary Barlow appears. Do you know what he'd say? Do you know what he'd say? Do you know what he'd say?
What?
He'd say, I'm back for good.
Yeah, that's it. There you go. You hit the nail on the head with that one, definitely.
You can't have Gary Barlow. I mean, this is it, isn't it? It's someone who can just sort of carry the standard of all of those things I've just mentioned. So what are they aware of from humanity? They look at the sum total of human achievement over millennia, say 2 or 3 millennia, depending on when we get extinct. So you've got everything from the Inca and the Aztec and the ancient Egyptians. You've got the works of Sophocles. You've got the works of Homer. You've got the Marcus Aurelius, William Shakespeare. I'm very, very of course the Latin ones aren't English, but I am a bit Anglo-centric on this. Balzac. You've got Balzac. You've got Cervantes. You've got Chekhov. I don't know. You've got the lot. You've got them all. And here is the human. Here's the human. Who's it going to be? And stop quibbling on the science. I know that you wouldn't have their mind or it's DNA. Yeah, but that's not the point, is it? That would be no fun. David is in Aylesbury. David, who's it going to be?
Well, it's not going to be Gary Barlow or anyone from Take That.
I'm glad you've expanded it to the whole band. What about
taking a bit more
what about? Hang on. What about Jason and Robbie, who are no longer in Take That?
Well, no, I'm still going to go with someone else.
Go on then.
Tim Peake, astronaut.
Go on, why?
Well, I've thought for a long time, actually, that an astronaut, male or female, are probably the peak of humanity. What with their intelligence, their physicality, their ability to work with others, to solve problems, to communicate. I just think that kind of person, and they would have experience of the cosmos.
Nominative determinism there as well. Tim Peake, the peak of humanity.
Yes, and
so if the aliens appreciate a pun as much as we do, David, he'd be halfway over the line already, wouldn't he?
Quite, and having him as a Brit, the first human or new human, that would be something as well.
I like that. I mean, the question of whether or not he's the best example of an astronaut is moot at the moment. But your reasoning behind why it should be an astronaut is exceptional. Actually, is really strong.
Thank you.
And I've met him as well, so he'd be able to tell them about me.
Okay.
All right, I spoilt it now. Still better than Gary Barlow. Who's it going to be? Let me see if I can read any of these texts. The Chuckle Brothers, either one. Sadly, only one Chuckle Brother is still with us, so that might be a little bit tricky. Ellen MacArthur, for similar reasons to Tim Peake. No. It's good that someone suggested a woman, but Ellen MacArthur was solitary, wasn't she? She sailed around the world alone, whereas Tim Peake, as David reminded us, will have skills that you need when you're isolated for ages with other human beings. You need cooperative skills. I think Tim Peake's going to take some beating, but we do need more women on the list. It is 12:30. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. This is from JVR. Anne Widdecombe. She might be bitter, but she's strong. We are completely ignoring the fact at the moment that DNA, as quite a few of you have pointed out quite correctly, but we are completely ignoring the fact that DNA cannot store memories, character, knowledge or skills. We're completely ignoring that, and we are greeting news from Southampton, the University of Southampton's Optoelectronics Research Centre, that they can inscribe the data of a single human onto a 5D crystal which can survive for billions of years, opening up the possibility of humanity itself being brought back from extinction billions of years hence, and we're wondering which human should appear in the laboratory when the DNA is processed. Translated? Done. When the DNA is done. So, David Attenborough, fair. Stephen Fry, not so much. Tim Peake, quite a strong play, although quite a few of you are pointing out that given that this would be the only human, possibly Ellen MacArthur, who sailed around the world on her own, would be better because she's used to being on her own. There's quite a lot going on here. I don't know about Anne Widdecombe, though. Jake suggests Sheila Fogarty. We could do a lot worse. Kelly suggests Cindy Crawford. This is why the texts are not as satisfying as the fight, because you have to say, why? Cindy Crawford? What? So who would you choose? Natalie's in Taunton. Natalie, what do you reckon?
Sandy Toksvig.
Why?
Because she's awesome.
You're just doing it. Everyone's just saying their favourite person. You're not thinking about the parameters of the programme. Go on, then.
I am. Apart from the fact that there's been a massive dearth of women up to now, apart from a couple of texts, which is shocking in itself, she is kind. She is generous. She has survived trauma. She is awake to the world. She is intelligent. She is informed.
This is all true.
She is
Hey, you missed one.
dynamic.
She's coming on Full Disclosure soon, I think.
Even better.
Yeah.
She's dynamic. She's engaged.
She's
she
very
cares.
short, and I don't mean
Yeah,
that.
I know.
I don't mean that as a
I know.
criticism, but I do think that we are
Yeah.
once again potentially overlooking the areas of physical
Yeah.
prowess.
I completely agree with you, but
Oh.
she is resourceful, and as a short person myself, I
Yes.
could get offended by that discrimination. But let's move
There's
on.
no discrimination. I'm just talking about physical prowess.
No, I know. I'm just being silly, but I just think.
Well, how dare you be silly during this phone-in?
Well, true. But I just think she's got the interpersonal skills and intrapersonal skills and the intellect and the resourcefulness to survive pretty much anything.
Okay.
And I also think, have we discussed reproduction?
are you
Have we discussed how we're
basing-
going to populate the planet?
I don't think we're going to. We're only going to have one. You can free
Well, it would be
sperm.
nice. It would be nice to have a world that didn't need men, now, wouldn't it?
Not really, no. But I take your point. Are you basing this entirely upon Sandy's work on television and radio, or are you a close personal friend? Because you've gone quite deep.
I know. I'm not a close personal friend at all, but I have read her books and I have followed her closely throughout her life and mine.
I'm afraid, putting her on the same pile as David Attenborough and Stephen Fry, as in splendid people, but not necessarily the only.
Oh, she rips shreds off Stephen Fry.
Well, I'll let them fight it out. But David Attenborough, I notice you're leaving out of your somewhat cutting analysis.
No, I think David Attenborough, the problem with David Attenborough, well, it's not a problem. He is very old, and what age are you going to recreate him at?
Obviously, this is yet another example of completely ignoring the capabilities and reality of DNA. But for the avoidance of doubt, 28.
Oh, okay. How about the love child of David Attenborough and Sandy Toksvig?
Oh, I don't know if we're allowed to do that. Might be next Friday's phone-in. Which two people would you encourage to procreate so that we could then save the product? But there's no guarantee, is there? Look at all the children of famous people who've not lived up to the achievements of their parents. Arnold Schwarzenegger is getting quite a lot of love on this. And I mean, he'd be quite good at, if we were to bring back the whole species, he'd be quite a good ambassador for humanity, because he is not only obviously a fine physical specimen, possibly too fine, a little bit unrepresentative, a little bit unrealistic, but of course also, a statesman, governor of California, not anymore, but someone who combines brain with significant amounts of brawn. Okay, and then think about it like this as well. Thank you, Natalie. We also want the idea of, this is what I want to represent me. I think that's where Natalie was coming from. But of course, Sandy doesn't necessarily represent all of humanity. Who could do the best job of representing all of humanity in one neat package? Jenny's in Woolwich. Jenny, what do you reckon?
Got the answer.
Go on.
Barack Obama.
Strong play. Very strong.
He has already won the world.
Yep.
He is a handsome man.
He is a handsome man.
He is cultured.
He's cultured.
Intelligent.
He's intelligent.
He will get on with everybody. If you're bringing in a lass to maybe do some future population, there's also Michelle. You could keep her on ice.
Yes.
And he is funny. Mic drop.
This is also true. We haven't had anyone not not from the Anglosphere, have we? I guess inevitably, given that this is a very English-speaking radio programme, but I mean, that would be one objection. There may be a normal... What about Gandhi or someone like that?
Oh, no. You've got to remember, seeing the type of characters yourself and I am, who would it annoy?
Well, there's not anyone here to be annoyed.
No. Who's listening?
Oh,
Who would be annoyed?
The racists.
Barack Obama.
You mean the racists?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And that it was a black man.
I think they're all busy at the moment. Okay. I'm going to
Come on, it's a good call.
It's Obama versus Tim Peake now.
Yeah. Well, Obama sends people into space.
But what's his skill set that is going to be of use to the aliens?
Knowledge, culture. I think he's practical. Could teach them how to play basketball and other sports and golf.
Yeah,
he's the whole package.
That's very true. He's got the lot, hasn't he?
Hey? He really has.
I hadn't thought of the basketball and the golf angle. That is. I don't know about Tim Peake, but then again, we come back to Luke Littler, who could teach them to play darts.
Yeah, that's one sport. This was two: basketball and golf.
I could have just nudged ahead of Tim Peake there with the basketball card. Who do you think would be the best human to store on a 5D crystal and then restore after the extinction of the entire human race at some unspecified point, billions of years hence? We're looking for serious suggestions, but we're frankly not getting many. Quite a lot of sports people. I don't know about Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo. Luke Littler getting a lot of love, but again, I don't think people are taking things... For people who don't know, Luke Littler is a darts prodigy who, at a tender age of about 16, very nearly won the World Championships and has gone on to win almost everything else and will no doubt be among the hot favourites for next year's World Championships. I think we've underestimated comedy. Oh, no, we haven't, because we've got Stephen Fry and Sandy Toxic. Billy Connolly would be quite a good one. Gabby Logan, says Trish. She has it all. Barack Obama getting a lot of support, as indeed is Cristiano Ronaldo. A few of you very kindly suggesting me, but that's just a terribly creepy way to try to get your message read out on the programme. I don't think even my mum would think I would be the best example of humanity to restore for posterity throughout eternity. Charlie's in Stepney Green. Charlie, who would you say?
Oh, hello.
Hello, Charlie.
Hello.
Who do you want to nominate for the last and first human?
I believe it should be David Olusoga.
Okay.
Because one, he has the intelligence.
Yeah.
Two, he has the knowledge and the back history, because obviously he's an historian.
But we've got all his books, remember?
Yeah, but
we don't need him. We've got all his books.
Flavour.
What?
He'll bring more flavour to things.
Flavour? For whom? The aliens might not care about flavour.
Well, they will care about flavour.
How do you know they care about flavour? Have you met them?
Because the world has vibes. That's why.
The world has vibes, and he could convey those vibes.
Exactly. And of his DNA, he's of mixed heritage. He's of obviously white Anglo-Saxon, and he's of Nigerian heritage. And so you'll get the two DNAs going, and so you'll create more race, because obviously...
You get a clearer picture of the spectrum of the species. Exactly. The more is represented in the person that we say. You get that from Barack Obama.
Yes, indeed. So, the previous caller did take my thunder, but that's okay.
So Olusoga and Obama edging
and
ahead of Tim Peake at the moment.
And they're both good looking, so we can't go wrong with that.
You've just defended yourself from the accusation of just picking your favourite person without any real thought.
No, he's not my favourite. He's one of. But...
It's posterity that we're addressing here. Who would be best suited to posterity? David Olusoga is an interesting one. Also someone I'm very keen to get onto Full Disclosure soon. In fact, this entire exercise could be seen as a sort of, let's make a list of people that we need to get on Full Disclosure, although I think Barack Obama for the time being might be a little bit out of our reach. You never know, do you, Charlie?
But David's here. He'll be able to talk with you.
He keeps saying he's going to come on. I bumped into him at a book festival. He keeps saying he's going to come on. We need to give him a bit of a rocket on that one and get him on as soon as possible. For people who don't know, the Professor of Public History, of course, at the University of Manchester, also television presenter and historian, a fantastic historian, particularly on issues imperial. It is coming up to 1:45. Jeremy is in Bury St Edmunds. Hello, Jeremy.
Watcher, listen...
hang on. For LBC Anoraks, who did you used to be before you became Jeremy in Bury St Edmunds?
Well, in a former life, I was Jeremy from Belsize Park.
You see, people like this
Does that
detail.
matter?
But yes, it does. People like this detail, Jeremy. They like to know these things. They like to keep track of movements and developments. So what human are you going to save?
Okay, this is a slightly obscure one, James. I admit that. A guy called Tom Lehrer. Have you ever come across him?
He wrote
satirist.
the song about elements. Did he?
Exactly.
Yes.
And that was the first part of my reasoning. Okay. So he understands all the elements. He's very, very clever. He's very, very funny. He's got great timing. But most importantly, he's now, and for most of his life, he's been a mathematician. He teaches maths. So he's a teacher, which is useful. He is Jewish by birth, like you know who, which I think, might play well. He's got terrific genes. He's 90-something now. And I think he'd be a fantastic candidate for full disclosure.
He would actually.
He's very, very, very generous. He never, ever has charged royalties on his work. And people use the elements the whole time, poisoning pigeons in the park and something like that.
I think you've taken this a little bit more seriously than some of my other contributors.
I'm sorry. I've written a very, very long list down.
Fantastic.
And I bet there is a downside, I'm afraid. I don't think he's got any kids, so I don't know how good he'd be at reproducing the human race.
How fecund he may. Well, that probably wouldn't matter by the time that he gets reanimated, because the aliens would have dealt with all of that, but they'd gone way beyond IVF and they'd be into all sorts of new technologies.
Yeah.
It's an amazing job description. It's a lovely combination of skills. Singer-songwriter, satirist and mathematician.
Yeah.
So in sense of ticking more boxes than any other human and ticking them hard, he'd be a really good suggestion, actually.
I honestly, I would die happy if I thought Tom Lehrer was going to
would be the standard bearer for the whole of humanity, billions of years into the future.
He doesn't take it too seriously.
It's very important. Which is very
masochism, tango, look out for that. Lots of songs about sadomasochism, all with tongue firmly in cheek, you understand?
Yes, it's taken a bit of a turn now, Jeremy.
He's great on the end of the world. We will all go together when we go, all suffused in an incandescent glow.
Well, he'll know by the time he won't, because DNA doesn't have memory. But for the purposes of this absurd radio feature, he would indeed have the memories of how the world actually ended. He was on That Was the Week That Was as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, but he more or less he was banned by the BBC.
Was he?
For poisoning pigeons in the park.
Oh, that one, yes, okay. Well, he'd have some stories to tell, wouldn't he? I like it. I mean, that's my left field nomination. If we were to go left field, I think Tom Lehrer would take a lot of beating. If we were to go more mainstream, I think it would probably be between Tim Peake and Barack Obama at the moment, with apologies to everybody from outside of the Anglosphere who we have just completely ignored entirely. It is... Thank you, Jeremy. Take care. 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10 minutes to 1 is the time. If you are a journalist on a regional news outlet and you're doing something that you think I should know about, then be aware of what's about to happen next, because Jane Haynes got in touch with me yesterday to tell me about something that was due to go live on Birmingham Live this morning, and that is why she is on the programme, because it is a very, very powerful but also extremely harrowing investigation into child poverty in... Well, I can't. If I say the second city, I'll get loads of messages from Scotland. So I'll just say in Birmingham. Why, Jane? Why was this investigation undertaken? Where did the idea come from?
Hi, James. Reporting from Birmingham, of course. I'm not even sure we like being called the second city. We're the first city, really. Yeah, right. But for as long as I've been a journalist, really, I've been visiting homes, speaking to teachers, speaking to families where child poverty is a huge issue. And I think we just reached the point where we realised that we couldn't just keep reporting passively about what was going on and calling for action through other voices, but we decided we would use our own. So we've pulled together some of the really heartbreaking personal stories that we're seeing, but also tallied that with a real dive into the data. And it will be no surprise to anybody who is involved in childcare or schools or anything else, that the findings are pretty horrific. We've seen child poverty rise in the last 9 years in Birmingham from about 27% of kids to nearly 50%. We see within that real pockets of mass deprivation, with 3 out of 4 kids in some communities living in relative poverty. And it's just not good enough that we keep constantly hearing that solutions are on their way, that there are long-term plans to fix this. We don't think, let our city continue to see over 100,000 kids living in poverty.
And you identify 5 changes that Birmingham needs, which we will move to shortly. But before that, what have been the key engines of decline? What have you identified as being the biggest contributors to the worsening of the situation, not to the original existence of the situation, but to the worsening in recent years?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's lots of factors that your listeners will know about, and you've spoken about so eloquently. So austerity cut and a general driving down of living standards are clearly massive issues. But in Birmingham, we've had a couple of other things that have really made an impact. Our council pretty much declared bankruptcy last year, and that's led to huge cuts. So it had already lost about £1 billion through austerity cuts. This year and next year, it's got to slash £400 million from its services. Now that's bigger. Those 2 years are bigger than any cuts that were made in austerity. And this is partly because of poor management, but partly because of rising demand. So all of those things are playing a part. We also found very clearly there was a race dimension to this. A lot of our poorest wards, where the most children are in poverty, are also in kind of global majority areas, particularly Asian majority areas. And we don't think at the moment any of the solutions we see are really addressing that cross-section of race and poverty. And we really feel that needs to be addressed as well.
What I mean, at risk of voyeurism, or I guess it's been called poverty porn, hasn't it, on the television sometimes, but that's a hideous phrase. But what specific examples have you and your team been most shocked by? Because I know you take the cases, don't you, of 4 or 5 specific children, but what have you come across that you really did not expect to see in 21st century England?
I think some of the worst things that we have seen are in housing. The conditions in which landlords are happily putting up families, including our city council, which is kind of pretty damning. We feature in the piece the home that a couple and their 4 children were sent to live in by the city council, that literally had a ceiling falling in, that had dodgy electrics, that was unsafe, that was inaccessible for the father who was in a wheelchair, which was why they'd ended up in a homeless situation to start with. And after we visited, I got sent a video from the young girl who lived there, of where the ceiling that we had seen was in danger had fallen in overnight, just crashed down on the toilet that people were obviously intending to use. Those sort of things, hunger, absolute dire situations of children kind of taking food at the end of their lunch break, where they're going up to the dinner ladies and saying, is there anything left over? Taking it home to share with their siblings.
And these people have nowhere to turn, really. The authorities feel that they have done their duty by them by putting them into this kind of housing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the children, I think, as well, we're putting a huge burden on these children. As I say, some of the cases we spoke about, the children didn't want to let parents know that how hungry they were or how much they were struggling, because they feel they're already under enough stress and strain. And that's an intolerable position to be putting young people in.
And that, I think, all of which leads inexorably towards the 5 changes that you describe Birmingham as needing now. End the 2-child benefit cap, provide free school meals to every child in poverty, something that we've done in London. I say we, something that happens in London. Create a city aid bank for baby and child essentials. Protect children's and youth services and create permanent multi-year household support fund and give more discretionary housing grants. This is aimed at national and local government.
They are, and that's why. So we're badgering our council, which is, as I say, in dire financial straits at the moment. But we feel that there could be alternative remedies to this massive sort of slash and burn approach to dealing with the gaps it's got in its funding. So that's kind of council and government combined solution that we think they need to find. But I'll be at Labour conference in Liverpool this weekend, hassling everybody I can come across to say, what are you doing? The 2-child benefit cap, I think university people are saying has to happen. The lifting of that. In Birmingham, we've got way more 3, 4 and 5 parent families than many other parts of the country. So we're seeing the impact more severely of that benefit cap. Free school meals for every child in poverty. I don't get why that is not a done deal already. The aid bank, we know that advanced talks are underway with involving Gordon Brown and his project to get these things underway. So we're hoping that there'll be good news coming very shortly about that, because again, babies being literally put in drawers and sleeping with parents unsafely because their parents haven't got the sort of domestic infrastructure. It's an extraordinary piece of work. You can find it at Birmingham Live. Just Google that, or indeed Google Birmingham Live Child Poverty, and you'll be taken directly to the site. You've done it as a self-contained site, as a sort of one of those happy marriages or unhappy marriages of journalism and activism. Jane Haynes, thank you so much for your time today. And keep in touch. Let us know how you get on and whether we can help again with a little bit of an amplification. Very, very briefly, the last word on which human we would actually save to bring back at some point billions of years hence, the single human whose DNA can be etched onto a 5D crystal. Joe's in Doncaster with the final suggestion. Joe, who's it going to be?
I think it's got to be somebody who is the most average that you can be to represent the human race. It can't be somebody who's genetically exceptional. So it needs to be somebody of average height, of average build, the most common eye colour, the most common hair colour. Somebody whose DNA is a hallmark.
A real midpoint, a real middle point of the entire species. Have you got anyone in mind?
Yeah, me.
Average Joe.
Yeah.
I'm glad we found time to squeeze that in at the end.
Why would it have to be that?
You might be taking it a little bit too seriously.
Am I? Sorry, I've already decided it should be Jesus.
You got a few No, you got to be alive.
Jesus lives.
Oh, Lord. That's it from me for another day. You can listen on catch up to the whole programme at Global Player, where you can rewind and pause live radio, and also get hold of all of the LBC shows as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download Global Player for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick with you at 4, but oh man, now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
That's a nice way to finish the week, isn't it?
James O'Brien on LBC.